Hello friends, welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy true trucker horror told straight from the road, hit subscribe, drop a like, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. Buckle up. Hello friends, my name's Burl Hackett, and I used to be a long-haul trucker out of Missouri. I ran reefer most weeks, produce out of the valley, meet out of Dodge City when the dispatcher didn't hate me, and anything that paid enough to keep the tires and the marriage turning. I'm 53, bald, 2 bad knees, and a shoulder that crunches in the cold. I'm telling you that because I'm not the kind of guy who scares easy, or at least I didn't used to be. If you're watching this in your living room, or riding shotgun on a night shift somewhere, do me a favor and hit subscribe, drop a like, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from. I'm serious about that part. I want to know how far this story travels, because the thing I ran into that night felt like it had been traveling a long time too. And if you ever find yourself pulling into the westbound rest area off I-44 outside Tulsa around 3 in the morning, depending on your direction, it's just past Sepulpa, near a little stand of trees that cut the wind in a funny way. Do yourself a favor and just keep driving. Roll on till Joplin or sleep at the scale house. Keep going. I hadn't planned to stop. It was a September run, humidity so thick it felt like breathing through a washcloth. I'd left Amarillo late on a hot Thursday, strawberry pallets pushing me against the clock, and promised my receiver in St. Louis I'd hit their dock by 11 the next night. Everything about that week was edging wrong. The reefer unit had hiccuped twice in Groom. A tire shaved itself weird on 412, and I had that rubber band feeling behind the eyes you get when caffeine stops being a friend. If you drive nights, you know the window I'm talking about. 3 to 4 a.m., when the CB is dead and the world feels hollowed out. I had another hour in me, maybe, but my bladder was shouting louder than the receiver and louder than my pride. Sometimes, out here, your body decides the route. I pulled into the rest area because it looked ordinary. That's the worst part, looking back. It wasn't a truck stop with a big lit sign and 20 lanes. It was one of those short DOT pads, 2 short rows for semis, some car slots up front, a cinder block building with a vending machine that eats your quarters, and one light flickering over a map of Oklahoma faded to the color of old bone. The sodium lamps buzzed overhead with that insect whine that makes your fillings vibrate. You could smell hot tar leaching out of the blacktop even at that hour, mingled with old motor oil and the sweet, freezer burn smell that leaks from reefers when the seals are a little tired. Wind pushed the treeline to sighing. I counted 3 other tractors scattered across the lot, curtains drawn, no engines idling. Someone's dog barked once, then gave up. I killed my engine and stepped down into night that felt like wet cardboard. My joints popped. I stretched and rolled my shoulder until it clicked. When I lit a cigarette, one of those stupid, comforting little rituals that keep a man upright at 3 in the morning, I felt the air move just enough to push the smoke sideways and back into my face. Somewhere, a cicada was sawing itself to pieces. I thought about texting my wife, Marla, something dumb like one more push, but we were in one of those quiet stretches you get 20 years into a marriage, the kind where fights are fewer and silences feel deeper, and anyway she was asleep and I was proud. So I put my phone back in the cubby, grabbed my mag light, and started toward the building. That's when I heard help. If you've worked nights, your brain has a whole shelf for that word. It wasn't a shout, it wasn't even a proper call. It was the kind of help someone makes when they don't want to spook whoever's nearby. Feminine maybe, then again not. It seemed to come from the direction of the picnic tables at the far end of the lot, where the light petered out and trees leaned in. I stopped, listening hard. Crickets. The compressor on my unit ticking as it cooled. The echo of highway noise, far off and steady as a mechanical ocean. Then again, clearer. Please help me. I can't move. Every safety talk, every trucker horror story swapped over coffee in Kansas, every post about decoy breakdowns and bait robberies clattered out of memory. You learn to balance the urge to help against the certainty that somebody is counting on that urge. I stood there with my cigarette between my fingers and my mag light suddenly feeling too heavy. My bladder nagged, mundane and human. The voice came a third time. It had texture now. It wasn't crying. It was repeating. I angled the beam of my mag light where the lot fell off into a little slope and the tree started. That's when I noticed what I should have noticed before. A tractor parked down past the last striped slot, not aligned with anything, nose crooked toward the trees. The front quarter sat in shadow, but the chrome on the stacks caught enough light to wink like a bad idea. Old Peterbilt, I thought, cherry red once but now tired into brownish maroon, the color of dried blood. The driver's door hung ajar. "Hello," I called, aiming light low because men get stupid when you blind them. "You all right over there?" The answer came in a way that is hard to tell right without sounding like I'm dressing it up. It didn't come from the trees. It didn't come from the ground. It came from the open cab window, like a chorus inside a hollow metal shell. "Help me." 4 or 5 voices. Maybe more. Male, female, young, old, layered so tight they made a single shape. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. When you've lived long enough, you recognize a wrongness that doesn't have to shout. I took 2 steps closer because that's what you do when you're the sort of idiot who still thinks he's decent. The cab's interior glowed faint orange from the lot lights. A shape shifted behind the open door. I lifted the beam and it lit a face. Except it wasn't a face so much as a list of faces taking turns being there. I swear to you, I'm not a dramatic man. This wasn't a mask, not the way you're picturing a Halloween mask. It looked like someone had done a good job remembering the parts of a human face and then lost their notes halfway through. The eye set a thumb too far apart. The jawline wanted to be symmetric but kept changing its mind. The skin had the high, wrong sheen of a raincoat. And as my light steadied, the features rippled, subtle at first, like someone shifting under a wet sheet. Cheekbones slid, an upper lip thinned, a nose flattened, and for one sick half-second I recognized the woman from a missing poster I'd stared at in a truck stop on 69. Black hair, little chipped tooth, the sort of school portrait grin they must copy-paste for flyers. Then the face became a man I swear I'd seen in a news clipping about a driver out of Kansas City who'd gone missing near Veneta. Then a teenager's face I didn't know. Then another. "Driver," it said, except all of them said it together from behind one mouth. "Help me. Come up. Come inside. Please." The maglite shook in my hand. My body did a dozen animal calculations. The faces behind the first face multiplied. It took me a beat to notice they were not behind the glass so much as in the glass, like reflections from angles that shouldn't reflect, moving independently of the light. A woman's mouth asked me to stay. A boy's eyes asked me to hurry. And in my head, I had the sick certainty that I heard them closer than my ears. I took a step back, and the whole cab leaned, as if the weight inside shifted to match me. A hand slid into view on the edge of the door. No glove, no visible dirt, just skin with 2 mini knuckles pushing out at the wrong places under it, organs where bones should be. The fingers gripped like a spider's legs, tips pressing and holding without nails. "Please," all of them said. "We can't move. We need help." I turned and ran. I didn't make a plan. There is a temperature that panic makes, and I hit it in one motion. My boots sucked at the tar and then slapped, and my breath went loud, and the night turned very, very big around a single stupid human who had left his engine off and his lights out. I fumbled my door handle. It stuck, then popped, and I threw myself inside and hit the lock with my elbow hard enough to send a bolt of pain up my arm. The key missed the slot twice. When it caught, I turned so fast I thought I'd snap it. The Kenworth coughed, caught, and the dash came alive, green lights blooming like little prayers. When the headlights washed the rest area, I saw them where the picnic tables were, 7, 8 shapes. If you asked me to draw them, I could only draw the gaps. Their outlines felt like someone had bent a person's joints wrong and told them to hurry. One moved sideways like a fiddler crab. Another had arms that hung past its knees, then longer, then shorter, like the measurements inside its skin were arguing. Every head was busy with faces the way a tree is busy with leaves. When the beams hit them, their faces didn't flinch. They turned to catch the light the way sunflowers find the sun. They came forward without looking like they moved, and there was a scraping sound under everything, not metal on asphalt exactly, but something dragged, something soft and heavy. I jammed the truck into gear, and the transmission shrieked at my stupidity. I corrected, mashed the pedal, and the whole rig lurched. My trailer wobbled like a drunk in a doorway. The shapes were too close. One was by the passenger's side steps, its head angled too far, its ear where its jaw should be, and under its skin a face I swear was mine at 25 blinked and said, "Don't go, Burl." And I didn't have time to wonder how it knew my name. I cut hard, nearly clipped a trash can, bounced a tire off the lip of the lot, and found the ramp back to the interstate like a man falling finds a branch. There was a moment where everything became white noise. Engine, road, heartbeat. Even the world outside the glass turned into the kind of blur you get right before a wreck. Then the truck straightened. I hit 60 without meaning to. The mirror showed the rest area whipping away, the glow of it shrinking, a crooked, maroon rectangle at the edge like a mouth that hadn't decided if it was smiling or not. I didn't stop. I didn't breathe properly for 20 miles. Somewhere near Bristow, I realized I had been weeping without tears, the kind of dry, ugly crying that happens when adrenaline misfires. My hands hurt from how I gripped the wheel. When I hit a Love's later that dawn, I almost kissed the cashiers. I pissed for 3 full minutes, and it felt like I was emptying a week of fear. You may think the story ends there. I thought so too. Burl saw something weird at a rest area and fled like a smart man. But I wouldn't be telling you this if the night had been content with being a story. I delivered the strawberries in St. Louis late but intact, slept in the bunk for 5 hours while the lot around me boiled with daytime noise, and woke up with the taste of pennies in my mouth and a noise under my sternum like an old radio searching for a station. My phone had 2 missed calls from a number I didn't know and a voicemail that went 34 seconds of silence before a whisper said, "Please," close to the receiver. Then nothing. I deleted it without listening again and immediately regretted deleting it, then regretted that regret. You get superstitious in a hurry when your brain is trying not to split in half. At a Flying J outside Effingham, I told myself I was going to be ordinary and I was going to prove I could be. I ate eggs that had died twice and bacon that had died 3 times. I complained about rates to a stranger. I took a shower in stall 2, the one with the broken bench. Afterward, wrapped in a towel, I Google mapped the rest area I'd stopped at. It looked like every other dot along the highway. For reviews in the last year, clean bathrooms. Watch for troopers in the median. Vending machines stole my money. Guy in a red Pete offered me meth. Nothing about a crowd of wrong-shaped people or a face that borrowed other faces the way a fisherman borrows flies. I scrolled more and found nothing, which is the kind of nothing that doesn't settle you. It sharpens the edge on what you saw. I told myself it was a dream mixed into waking, that I was overtired, that the echo of news stories and those flyers on bulletin boards had scrambled, that the cab I saw was just a guy sleeping with the door open and my mind had poured monsters into the gap. But somewhere around Terre Haute, my chest radio tuned itself another half-notch clearer. I kept meaning to put on music louder than thought. I didn't. I wanted to hear if the station ever stopped scanning. 2 nights later, back westbound with a lighter load and 15 more hours of thinking under my belt, I did a cruel, stupid thing to myself. I turned the CB on Channel 19 and asked, casual as I could make it, if anyone ran past the westbound rest area near Sepulpa on Friday night and noticed anything weird. I said woman's voice sounded hurt, like I was the kind of guy looking to do a good turn. 2 drivers ignored me. One asked if I meant the one after the way station. Another said, don't stop there after midnight, and then pretended his mic died. I pinged again. Silence. I told myself to let it go. That would have been the end if I hadn't dreamed that night. Sleep came messy, and when it finally stuck, it took me straight back to the orange light and the door ajar. Only in the dream, I didn't run. I stepped up into the Peterbilt's cab and put my hand on the rubbery arm and watched my hand sink, watched the skin dimple like pudding around my fingers, and heard blessings whispered in 5 voices and a baby's breath, and saw, beyond the sleeper curtain, the suggestion of a space bigger than any cab on earth, a corridor of polished black that led down and down and down and smelled like bleach and something copper-sweet. The faces in the window became faces in the mirror, and then became faces in the metal, and then faces in the space itself. And they weren't pleading anymore. They were welcoming, like a church when you arrive late. I woke choking on the taste of whatever that space was. I slept no more that night. You can forgive a man almost anything if he hasn't slept. I got home, unloaded a week's worth of laundry from the cab, and tried to tell Marla a version of the story that was mostly a joke. Rest area creeper, I called it. She did that thing where she measured my face against my voice and knew one didn't match the other. She touched my shoulder and said, please don't make a habit of stopping at sketchy places. And I promised, which was a dumb promise because there aren't any non-sketchy places at 3 in the morning. That night, I lay awake and listened to my own heart scan for a station and dreamed again of the polished black corridor. Except this time I knew that if I kept walking down it, there would be other cabs opening out along the sides, cabs folded into it like rooms in a bad hotel, each with a door ajar and a voice that sounded like mine. I started researching. That's a dramatic word for a man scrolling with his thumb at 2 in the morning, but it felt like research. Missing drivers I thought I remembered from bulletin boards. News stories about semis found idling with nobody inside. Posts in dead trucking forums where guys with handles like Dooley Dan and Redline Roy told campfire tales in text. One thread caught me the wrong way. The choir at mile 216. Jokes at first. They sing you to sleep. They borrow your face. The OP had 3 posts total and no history and stopped replying to comments in 2016. Half the comments were pics or it didn't happen. One was from a wife whose husband had disappeared from a rest area in 2013. She said the troopers told her he'd probably stepped out to pee and wandered into the trees. Another guy claimed he'd found a cab abandoned at dawn, the seats still warm, a crucifix on the dash, and what he thought were fingerprints melted into the vinyl around the door grip, too many and too close together to make sense. It wasn't enough. The mind can make a shape out of 3 dots and call it a face. But I couldn't stop looking. A week later, on my way through Oklahoma again, in daylight this time, sun high and clean as a new coin, I forced myself to pull into the same rest area. The lot looked smaller in daylight. That's a trick the night plays, I guess. You could see the scuffed places where trailers habitually bumped the curb. The cinder block building smelled like cheap disinfectant and the dehydrated bologna of vending machine sandwiches. I walked the road to where I thought that old maroon Peterbilt had sat. There wasn't a scar on the asphalt that told me so. It was just a kind of muscle memory, like your feet know where a step is in your own home. A maintenance guy in a high-vis vest pushed a broom that had given up years ago. I asked him, feigning casual, if there'd been any trouble out here lately, break-ins, drug heads, anything. He looked me up and down in a way that said he'd seen a lot of different kinds of men at hours they weren't proud of and shrugged. We had a deer walk through the bathroom once, he said. Broke a mirror. Then, after a pause, he added, State trooper asked last month about a truck that never left. Left, but didn't leave. You know? He laughed like that was funny. I asked what he meant, and he looked down at his broom. Lot cameras went out that night, he said. Like, poof. You boys leave your reefer on. It messes the feed. That's what they told me. He lifted a hand. I just sweep. I went back to my Kenworth and sat with the door open and the wind pushing warm air into the cab. I should have been grateful the place looked stupid and ordinary. Instead, the ordinariness felt complicit, like a poker face that knows the whole table is rigged. I left, drove to a truck wash, put the world back into a rhythm I understood with hoses and soap and movement. For a few days, I slept better. Then the call started. Unknown numbers at weird hours, long voicemails of nothing, followed by a word, a single please or a hello spoken in that many voices way, like a choir forgetting how to harmonize. It wasn't my imagination. I let Marla hear one. She made a face I don't think she meant to make and told me it was probably spam calls with some glitch. I changed my number. I didn't put it anywhere public. The call still found me. I started turning my phone off in the cab at night, but there is a difference between turning a thing off and knowing the thing is sleeping next to you. Silence started to feel like something lurking. I turned the CB off and then on, off and then on, listening for that static to slip into words. I stopped at the Highway Patrol office outside Tulsa on a Tuesday in October when the air had gone hard and honest. I told the woman at the counter I had a question about the rest area out past Sepulpa. I didn't tell her what I'd seen. I told her I'd heard about robberies. She was used to truckers, you could tell. She pulled a face like she had a headache that worked part-time. We got calls, she said. People wander. A lot of folks on the road who don't need to be on the road. I asked if anyone had gone missing there recently. She looked at me differently then. Not suspicion. Weariness. People go missing everywhere, she said. I thanked her and left feeling like I'd brought a joke to a funeral. So I did the dumbest thing a man like me can do. I went back at night. I told myself I wanted to see it and prove to myself there was nothing to see. The truck had a new humming in the dash you only catch at certain speeds. A coin behind plastic maybe. That rhythmic little clack that rides your ear into bad thoughts. The air was cold enough to sting when I cracked the window. I drove past the rest area, even slowed to look, and then kept going another 3 miles and took the next exit, looped back, and pulled in. It was almost exactly 3 in the morning. You're welcome to judge me. I judge me too. The lot was empty. I parked under a lamp that hummed so loud I felt it in my fillings. The cinder block building through a trapezoid of light onto the pavement. I left my engine idling. I left my door open. I told myself I was going to stand on the bottom step and smoke a cigarette and be profoundly, beautifully bored. Help, said a voice that arrived like a déjà vu. I didn't turn the beam of my flashlight. I was done shining light on things that learned from looking at it. I stared at the black between the trees and made my voice do a thing it didn't want to. No. I expected silence to surge back. Instead, it laughed. Not mean. Not kind. Like it had found a surprise inside me. Burl, it said, and my stomach dropped off a cliff. Don't be rude. It added in a tone that belonged to my mother when I was 8. It's cold. Something moved at the edge of the light, just outside the circle my headlamps made. It wasn't a shape. It was the absence of a shadow, a footprint punched in air. Every cramp in my legs flickered back to life. I tossed my cigarette. It arced and landed near the start of the slope. Something stepped on it, and the ember made the underside of a foot glow through translucent skin for a heartbeat. A brief orange lantern showing tendons laid the wrong way. I know you, the many voices said. You came before. You listened. You're good. We like good. My body did what soldiers and animals do when they've decided. It made me very suddenly efficient. I stepped into the cab and swung the door closed with a shoulder, shoved the lock down with the heel of my hand, put the transmission into gear, and pulled like the man I'd always been. As I did, a hand slid into the narrowing gap between door and frame. Except to call it a hand was to flatter the idea of it. It was a collection of knuckles knuckling where knuckles shouldn't, each pressing out under skin that looked like someone had forgotten to sew it to anything. Where there should have been nail was a matte pad, like the tip of a glove's finger. It pressed politely against my door. The door pressed back. I mashed forward, and the door shut on it with a closed-mouth thud. There was no scream. There was a noise the way meat makes noise when it yields, and then remembers how to be meat again. The hand withdrew, more offended than hurt. The door clicked into place, and I was moving. In the rear view, the slope down to the tree-line bloomed with figures, not running, not striding, just present, like the space had been waiting to be occupied and finally remembered how. The maroon Peterbilt wasn't there. Something like it was. We tell ourselves we see trucks as machines and not as faces, but the front of a rig is a face if you look at it right. This one had a grin. I don't mean that metaphorically. The grill slats were bent into a shape that suggested teeth, and the headlight bezels had a sad, delighted tilt to them. And I hated how much I hated that my mind was making the world a cartoon to keep itself from cracking. The figures arranged themselves the way people do for a group photo. Not facing the camera. Facing me. I drove. I didn't floor it because men who floor it at rest areas end up in the ditch. I put the truck exactly where it needed to be and let it go. When I hit the interstate, I breathed, or remembered to. 5 miles later, I realized my cheeks were wet. The cold air from the vent made trails of coolness down lines I hadn't felt start. That should have been the end. I wish it could have been. But the thing about being looked at is it changes you. The world went gray at the edges. I felt watched in mirrors that didn't have eyes. I took long haul only in daylight for a bit, which is not a choice freight cares about. Money got thin. I snapped at Marla over the dumbest things. I parked in the back corners of lots and pretended that was a strategy. I stopped sleeping properly. When I did sleep, I walked a corridor that smelled like bleach and copper, and in every mirror I passed, my face slid and wore someone else's nose, someone else's age, and whispered in a voice as soft as carpet, "Please." One night, on a threadbare trucking forum that should have died in 2019, a private message arrived from a user with an empty profile. "You saw the choir. Don't stay after 3. If you stayed, it's too late." It included a link to a dead blog with one mirrored page left, courtesy of some internet preservation saint. The post was 8 years old and written by a woman named Lark whose brother had disappeared at a rest area in Oklahoma. She wrote about calling the troopers, about a security camera that went fuzzy for 19 minutes and 32 seconds, about a truck left running with a lunchbox open and an apple half browned. She wrote about dreams of a hallway with a black shine like obsidian. and how she started seeing her brother in reflections at angles that shouldn't reflect. She wrote about a phone call that was just please in a dozen voices. She ended with, they put on the faces like fishermen put on lures. They put on the voices like coats. The last line was, if he knocks, don't open. That line lives in me now like a bone that healed crooked. I did a thing I'm not proud of. I drove there again. Not to be brave. Not to prove anything. I drove because part of me had started to hum to the same pitch as whatever lived there, and I needed either to end it or to join it. I didn't tell Marla where I was going, only that I'd be running late. The sky that night was a torn textbook of clouds, blotting out a moon that wanted to be seen. The world was that special kind of silent where you can hear every loose spoon in your drawer at home in your memory. I parked the Kenworth in the exact slot I believed I'd used the first night, which is a superstitious lie. The lot doesn't have exacts, only approximates, and I left the engine running. I stepped down and stood on the bottom step of my cab, both hands on the frame like a man at a lectern. I had nothing to say. The voice didn't ask this time. It greeted. Burl, it said, and hearing my name said in 10 overlapping tones felt like a hand pressed in the center of my chest. No, I said, because I had read Lark's line too many times to forget it. No, we're not friends. The air changed pressure, like someone had opened a door to a much larger room. The trees on the slope seemed to lean back, as if making space. I couldn't see them exactly, but the knowledge of the shapes was there the way you know your own house in the dark. A laugh rolled across the lot. I don't want to make it pretty by calling it a laugh. It was the sound your aunt makes when the cake collapses in the oven and she decides she knew that would happen. Tolerant. Amused. Certain. You came back, they said. I came to tell you to leave me alone. I lied, because whatever this was didn't strike me as the kind of thing you could fire or report. You can come, they said. It's good. We're warm. The wind went cold. We're hungry, they added, and the number of voices on that word was too many, like crowd noise squeezed through a straw. I stepped backward into my cab, slow, like speed was a kind of weakness. I closed the door with 2 fingers on the handle and set the lock with a click that felt blasphemous in the quiet. I sat. I let the truck idle and watched the edge of the lot where the light became tree-lean and the tree-lean became everything else. I thought of church basements. I thought of AA meetings where someone tells a story and everyone in the circle sees themselves in it, and something bigger than the room shifts. I thought of faces lined up on cork boards in gas stations, of photocopies, the gray blur where a smile should be. I thought of my younger face in a reflection that wasn't mine. I reached for the radio without meaning to. Static climbed, then settled. The CB made a sound like a throat clearing. I turned it off. The truck hummed. The world waited. They don't like being refused. I can't prove that. I only know the next weeks turned into a series of little malfunctions that could be chalked up to bad luck if you enjoy lying to yourself. My reefer alarmed 3 times on loads that had no business alarming. The gauge for my coolant started to stutter. I changed the sensor and it stuttered anyway. I switched to day runs, and the day found ways to make me sleepy. The phone call stopped and then started again from numbers that looked like mine with 1 digit wrong. Please, they'd say, or hello, or Burl, or hurts, and sometimes, and this is the one that still wakes me, we're the same. I threw the phone across the cab once, and it hit the passenger footwell and slid under the seat, and kept talking from there, thin and cheerful, like a children's show on low volume in another room. I had one friend I told the whole thing to. Zeb, out of Springfield, drove flatbed, the sort of man you'd trust to hold your ladder and your secrets. He listened and didn't laugh. He told me a story about an abandoned way station on 60 where the lights burned at noon inside a building with no power lines. He wasn't trying to one-up me. He was saying we live in a country built on spaces too big for belief to fill all the way. He asked if I wanted him to come sit with me at that rest area one night. I said no in a voice that let him know the invitation mattered and mustn't be accepted. He nodded like I'd told him something important without words. A month later, he texted me a blurry picture of a truck mirror at dawn and said, "Saw a kid's face in this that wasn't there when I took it." I told him to delete it. He wrote, "Too late," and then didn't joke for 3 days straight, which for Zeb is forever. The end, when it came, was simple. I had a run that would have taken me past that rest area again in the small hours, and I felt the hum in my ribs spool up like a winch. I could have planned differently. I could have taken a different route. I could have switched with another driver, claimed a fever. Instead, I found myself counting miles in tens, and then in ones, and then in fractions, until the green highway sign rose like a priest lifting his hands. I put my blinker on. I let the truck drift toward the exit lane. My hands were steady. My breath was deep as if I were about to dive. Then I thought of a girl in a school portrait with a chipped front tooth. I thought of the woman named Lark writing, "If he knocks, don't open." I thought of the face in the maroon Peterbilt that wore my 25-year-old smile like a borrowed shirt. I saw, very clearly, myself stepping down from my Kenworth and walking toward the slope. And I knew with a knowledge that fills your bones like hot lead that if I did that, the corridor I'd been walking in my sleep would be waiting for my feet in the waking world. I flicked the blinker off. I kept right on going. I didn't speed. I didn't floor it. I made a measured, adult decision. I chose, which is different than fleeing. I quit 2 weeks later. There were practical reasons I could have used if I still cared about being believed. Freight rates were garbage. My shoulder was a jar of broken glass. Marla had been sublimely patient for 20 years and deserved a man who slept. But that's not why. I quit because the road had become a corridor, and every mirrored surface in every truck stop had become a mouth, and I couldn't tell which voices in my head belonged to me and which belonged to the choir that borrows faces and carries them from rest area to rest area like souvenirs. I sold the Kenworth to a kid who looked much too young and painfully eager. I told him to avoid stopping on I-44 near Sepulpa between 3 and 4 in the morning. He laughed, like I would have laughed at his age, and promised he would. I watched his taillights leave the lot and wanted to sprint after him and take the keys back. I didn't. You cannot live other people's futures for them. You can only shout your warnings and hope they land. I still drive a pickup around town when I need to. I still catch myself checking my rearview mirror for faces that aren't mine. I still wake some nights with copper on my tongue and that bleach-clean smell in my nose, as if I've been somewhere that pretends to be a hospital inside a machine. Sometimes, in the television of my head, I see a group photo forming on the slope by the picnic tables, and new faces have joined, and one of them is close enough to my own to break me into parts. Sometimes the phone rings, and there's only the sound of tire noise and wind, and the faint chorus of a dozen people trying to say the same thing and failing to match their timing. If you ever find yourself out there in the dark hour when the road narrows to a line and your body feels like a borrowed coat, and the red blink of your reefer says it's all under control, and a voice almost like your mother's, and almost like a child's, and almost like your own calls help, you will want to be the person you always believed you were. You will want to put your feet on the ground and find the hurt thing and lift it into the light. But sometimes the hurt thing is a mouth that wants you to be its language. Sometimes the lost things are not looking to be found, but to find. Keep driving. Fuel at the big places. Take your breaks where there are too many people for your comfort. If you pull in at that westbound rest area outside Tulsa, and it looks perfectly ordinary, so ordinary it feels like a clean sheet pulled tight over a messy bed, remember me, and remember the voice that said my name in 10 tones, and tell the road to carry you another 30 miles. And if you ever hear a knock at your cab door that sounds a little like someone tapping and a little like a hand rearranging its knuckles to fit, don't open. Not for a woman crying in a voice that sounds like your first girlfriend. Not for a kid who can't remember his mother's last name. Not for the man who says he has your wallet even though you can feel it in your pocket. Not for the sound of your own voice begging you to be the guy you used to be. There are places where the world thins. There are vehicles that aren't vehicles. There are doors that are not doors, but invitations. I am not brave. I am not special. I am a man who had to learn that not every plea is a rescue waiting to happen. Sometimes, a plea is a hook. I still say grace before meals now, a habit my mother gave me without meaning to. I add a line she wouldn't understand. Keep my face my own. It sounds silly when I see the words on the page. It has kept me alive. If you see me in a truck stop and I flinch when I catch my reflection in the stainless steel coffee urn, forgive me. I'm checking that my eyes are at the distance I remember. I'm making sure my mouth belongs to me. If you pass through Tulsa at 3 in the morning and you're not too proud to listen to an old fool, skip the rest area after the trees start to push the lot into a circle. Keep the wheels turning. Let the highway sing you past somewhere that does its singing in a different key. And if your phone rings from a number that looks like yours with one digit wrong, let it ring. Let it ring until it forgets your name. My name is Vern. I hauled oilfield equipment for 12 years out of Casper, then moved to General Freight because my back and my nerves had both had enough of winter roads with too much weight and too little shoulder. I'm not a storyteller by trade. I'm the sort of man who keeps receipts in a shoebox and floss in the glove compartment. I live in a rental on the east side of town where the wind never stops pressing its palm against the windows. If you're listening to this somewhere warm and normal, I'm glad. If you're listening on the road, especially anywhere near Laramie, all I ask is that you don't treat this like entertainment. Treat it like a storm warning. Write the mile marker down. I had the midnight to morning run on a Thursday, the kind where you tell yourself there's no point getting a motel, because by the time you'd sleep it'd be daylight and you'd feel worse. The load was light, plastic pallets out of Fort Collins going up to a food distributor near River. You can do it in one stretch if you don't poke around. I topped off diesel at a Maverick just before the state line, grabbed a coffee that tasted like burnt tire and hope, and told the kid at the register to stay in school. He said he already had a GED, and I said that counted. The little things we say each other to make being alive tolerable. Wind was steady out of the west, not the hard slap that blows you across a lane, but the endless hand that makes the steering wheel feel like a living thing. If you've never driven 287 at night, picture a two-lane threaded through sage and low hills, with the sky big enough to make you feel like the ground is a raft. There's a lot of honest darkness out there. Your headlights give you a little tunnel, and the rest is America on mute. A few ranch turnoffs, a few mailbox clusters that look like gray teeth, and once in a while the eyes of a pronghorn reflecting back like nickel coins. I passed Laramie around 3:20 a.m., according to the dash. The town glowed on my left like a low ember. After that it's empty again. I had the heater set 2 clicks above comfortable because my right knee aches in the cold and sings when I keep it warm. The highway advisory signs had that white-hot tone. Wind 45 plus mph I-80. Use caution. I wasn't on I-80. I felt smug about that for exactly 5 minutes, and then had to smirk at myself because the air doesn't care what sign it's under. I saw the wreck a long time before I understood it. Red blinking in the distance, steady like a heartbeat. At first I thought it was a slow-moving freight farther ahead, trailer hazards, maybe a flat tire. As I got closer, the red lights separated into 2 sets, one low to the ground, one higher. When I came around a gentle curve I saw the shape. A sedan nosed across the southbound shoulder at a bad angle, front end buried in the sage, and a pickup up on the far side with its hazards on. Grill kissed into a rock like it had tried to help and misjudged. The sedan's trunk was popped in a way you only see after bad luck, jammed up a handspan, tail lights half crushed. One headlight was still on, lancing white into the brush. The other was blind. Steam or breath clouded in the air. I slowed because that's what decent men do. We'll risk our own metal to keep someone else breathing. My hazard clicker started its metronome. I pulled onto the shoulder a little before the scene, left my low beams on to make a pool of light, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped down into cold that had a metallic taste. I told myself to keep my wits. People die on empty highways not because the first accident kills them, but because the second one does. I set a couple of triangles behind my trailer, old habit, and pointed the hood of my rig a shade outward to give passing traffic a clue to move over. There was no passing traffic. "Hello," I called, even though you always feel ridiculous doing it. "Anyone hurt?" Something moved by the sedan's passenger door. A man stood from a crouch with the graceless motion of someone whose body was arguing with itself. He wore a tan jacket dark at the sleeves and had hair that might have been gray or might have been dusted with frost. For a half second my brain filled in rancher, because that's who lives out here. He held his left arm close to his side like it didn't belong to him. "Are you okay?" I said. "I can call 911. He didn't answer. He took a step toward me that wasn't right, like he'd forgotten which joint did what. His foot set down toe first, and then heel, the opposite of how people move when they've lived on Earth. I've seen drunks, tweakers, concussed folks, men with strokes. This wasn't that. This was a puppet trying to remember the choreography of being a person. 2 more figures came around the back of the sedan. A woman with hair pasted to her face and a teenager in a hoodie with the hood drawn tight. The woman's mouth was open, or it looked open. The sound that came from it didn't match the shape or the temperature of the air. "Help," she said, but it was more like the word was being played through a broken phone speaker. Flat, stripped of the meat of a human breath pushing it. The teenager flinched when my flashlight touched him, but not the right sort of flinch, not the, "ow, that's bright" flinch. It was the flinch of something noticing the idea of light. "Where's the driver?" I asked, because people ask practical questions when they don't know what else to do. "Anybody bleeding? Anyone pinned?" The man in the tan jacket tilted his head. It tilted too far. I'd like to tell you I'm exaggerating. That fear made a normal thing look abnormal. This tilt was past the point any neck has business being. It stubbornly kept the same expression while his head went wrong. "We need," he said, and the word hung there like a sign with no building under it. "Then, we need you." I backed a step without deciding to. My flashlight shook. I thought of a trick my dad taught me when I was 12 and scared to go into the barn after hearing a coyote. "Describe what you see," he'd said. "Names are ropes to pull yourself with." So I said, low, to myself. Sedan blue. Wyoming plates. Trunk popped. Pickup, older Ford, white, bent bumper. 3 people. Saying people felt like a decision. No visible blood. Then, more quietly, like the tail of a prayer, "Something's wrong." I took my phone out to dial. The woman made a sound when she saw the phone, as if I'd shown her a gun. Not fear. Defiance. Her mouth stayed very open, wider than I like to remember, and the sound that came was a static hiss that had occasional notes in it, like a choir warming up. My skin sprouted pins. The teenager stepped forward and put his hand on the sedan's roof. Fingers spread. He pressed so hard the sheet metal, which is thin on the roof of a modern car, dimpled under each finger pad. People can dent a car if they're angry. Not like that. Not with even pressure that looked like a machine calibrating itself. He looked at me with eyes that were too black. Or maybe there wasn't enough reflection in them, and so I read that as black. The mind does what it must to put a frame around things it doesn't understand. "Okay," I said, to myself, to them, to the sky that had lost all stars. "I'm calling Highway Patrol." I punched 9 and 1 and 1. The phone didn't ring. It didn't give me the friendly assurance of a busy signal. It gave me what you get in certain nightmares. Nothing. The screen showed the numbers, and then showed call failed. I tried again. Same. I tried the CB, which I had left on channel 19 half out of habit. Static. Not the usual soft snow. A very fine static like wind blowing over a glass bottle. When I moved the mic away from my mouth, I heard it whispering, not in words, but in the shape of words winding themselves up. Behind the 3 figures, in the sage beyond the ditch, something else moved. I didn't see it at first because my attention was knotted around the immediate. The movement was a rhythm, deliberate and low. Imagine, if you can, a spider the size of an elk, but wrong, because the legs are not legs but beams of darkness that bend into the idea of legs. Imagine it far enough away that your brain says, branch in the wind, and then closer so your brain says, fence line, and then closer so your brain stops offering excuses. I couldn't see the body it belonged to, only the way the ground seemed to darken where it stood, as if light at that spot was being asked to keep quiet. "I have flares," I heard myself say, stupid and brave in the same way. Don't move." The man in the tan jacket smiled. It looked like his mouth remembered what a smile should be and arranged the pieces without understanding the warmth behind the shape. He raised his left arm finally, and it didn't raise by elbow and shoulder. It lifted as one whole hinged thing, a mannequin limb, and when the sleeve fell back I saw that his skin there was scraped in a long stripe, and under the scrape the texture was not meat. Not bone. A mesh. Black. Honeycomb fine. Like the inside of a burned electrical cable. I used to pride myself on being useful. The sort of guy who can ratchet strap a problem and keep rolling. Usefulness is a religion in places where the sky and the dirt share too much space. In the seconds that followed, I converted usefulness into speed. I turned, I put my feet where they needed to go, and I moved. I didn't run because running invites a chase. I walked with intention toward my truck, which is a sentence only a trucker would believe. I put the flashlight back in my pocket because light felt like a promise that could be stepped on. I didn't look behind me because looking is a rope they can pull. The distance between where I'd set my triangles and my step lost its shape. The wind had a different quality, like sound changes when you walk from an open field into a garage. The world turned concave. The static in the CB shifted from weather to choir. I fumbled the grab handle with fingers that wanted to be mittens and hauled myself into the cab and slammed the door and locked it, Because this is America, and we lock doors against the unknown like the unknown gives a damn. My hand found the key. My memory believes I had to turn it 3 times, which doesn't make mechanical sense. The engine came alive with an old friend's cough. The gauges jumped like guilty men. I turned on my brights, and the scene outside burned white. They were close to the bumper. The man in the tan jacket had his head tilted so far now that his ear was nearly level with his shoulder, and he didn't seem inconvenienced. The woman's mouth had changed shape while my eyes were inside my skull dealing with other things. It had softened around the corners, or blurred, as if someone had traced lipstick where there should be none. The teenager's fingers had left 5 soft inversions in the sedan roof that would be hell for any body shop to talk the insurance company through. They all looked at the brightness, and then at me like a thought passing between them. Behind them, something that was either farther away than it looked or closer than it should be lowered itself another few feet toward the road. I put it in gear and eased forward, careful, like an old man in a crowded parking lot. You can break people trying to help them. The 3 parted to either side without looking at their own feet, without looking at one another, just parted. The teenager leaned close to my passenger's side, and for a moment his face filled my window, and it was the emptiest face I'd ever seen. Empty like a template before content is pasted into it. And the emptiness said in a polite, borrowed voice, "We need you to help." I shook my head because politeness seemed like the only countermeasure I had. "I'll send help," I said. I inched past. When I was clear of the sedan, I let the rig straighten, and then I gave it what it could take. The trailer groaned in the hitch in a way that told me I'd feel it in the morning. The highway pulled forward like a ribbon being reeled. In the mirror, I saw the pickup's hazard lights blinking idiot beautiful in the night. I saw the sedan's remaining headlamp cut a white blade across brush. I saw something above them, a dark knot shape, like someone had taken a bite out of the sky and the edges hadn't decided yet whether to bleed stars. I didn't break the speed limit. I didn't have to. Fear has its own mathematics, and it will race you ahead of anything that can follow. I drove until I saw the green sign for a county road, and then the square store-lit shape of a gas station whose lights never go off because one day the owner forgot to put them on timers. I pulled in, parked far from the pumps, and let my hands shake. Then I did what you do when sanity has only one path. I called it in. The call went through. The dispatcher's voice had the late-night calm that tells you she's seen every flavor of human wreck and learned which tone keeps people from making it worse. I told her I was northbound on 287 about, hell, I guessed, 15, 20 miles past Laramie, near that turnoff with the rusted cattle guard. Possible injury accident, I said. Blue sedan off the southbound shoulder. Pickup nearby. 3 persons standing. No blood scene. I didn't render aid because the scene felt unsafe. It's strange to make your mouth do right-angled words when your heart is still walking in circles. Any other hazards? She asked. Fire? Fuel? Negative, I said, happy to put a word like negative in the world. But I stopped. What does a grown man say? Something in the brush, I said. Large. I can't explain in a way that helps. Just send troopers. And maybe get Wyolink to call a unit already close. Copy, she said. You can stay on the line if you like. I said I would, and then didn't, because what I needed was silence and the radio inside my chest still searching stations. I turned my CB off and on and off and on again like an idiot treating an illness with light switches. A volunteer fire pickup rolled into the lot 10 minutes later. The man who got out had the posture of someone who's owned 3 backs and none of them good. He asked if I was the caller. I said yes and pointed. He asked if I wanted to follow him back to the mile marker, and I said I'd rather not. He gave me a look I've given others. Half respect, half judgment, the practical calculus of risk, and the ugly feeling that bravery is a currency you're lying about having. He left. His taillights took a piece of my night vision with them. An hour later, maybe 45 minutes, time in those stretches is a soft metal. I called the highway patrol office and asked if they found anything. The guy at the desk said, "We did not," in the tone of a man whose shift had already contained more than its share of strangeness. I said, "No vehicles?" He said, "Negative. We did have a private party call in a disabled car earlier near that area. Might have been moved. You know how folks are." I didn't argue. I didn't have words for the shape of the argument. He asked if I wanted to leave my contact for a report. I said no, and then I said yes and gave it to him. He didn't call. That would be the end if the world were a tidy book. It wasn't. Over the next week, I started noticing things. Little stuff that can ruin you faster than big stuff if you allow it moss to grow. Reflections behaved wrong. Not all, just enough. In the big convex mirror I used to back into docks, my face lagged a fraction of a second behind my movement, like a bad video call. In the window at a Flying J, the woman behind the counter smiled, and in the glass her smile had an extra frame where it learned how. In my own side mirror at dawn, I saw a cluster of red hazard lights in places where there was only empty highway. It was like the world was teaching itself to be the world. I started using names to pull myself through. Sage, sky, asphalt, coffee. The mingled smells of diesel and dryer sheets that you get at 2 a.m. in halls lined with bolted-down chairs. I wrote the numbers 3 verse 25 on a napkin and tucked it in the visor. If I saw that time again, I wanted to be the kind of man who didn't stop. Then I made the mistake of looking up news. You can find anything if you're willing to count rumor as evidence. I searched 287 accident no vehicles and got a thread on a prepping forum where a guy with the handle WY Dust posted a story in 2018 about seeing lights and folks acting wrong and then nothing there. Half the replies were loose cattle and sleep deprivation. One was from a woman who said her sister had seen survivors standing by a rolled SUV near Medicine Bow, waving wrong. And when she pulled over, they walked away into the sage and disappeared like fog. She was laughed off the board and deleted her account. A cash scrape kept the post. I asked a trooper I know, a man named Blake who plays darts at a place in Casper that pretends not to be a bar. I didn't give him the long version. I said, "You ever get called to something on 287 that feels out of the ordinary?" He gave me a look I can't fully write down, like someone remembering a dog they loved that bit them and then died. He said, "Out of the ordinary how?" And I said, "Like false calls. Like doubling." He rubbed his jaw and said, "We get a lot of calls we can't find." He took a drink and said, "Sometimes your contacts are wrong in the wind." He darted 2 bullseyes in a row and changed the subject. I know what I saw. I also know what I might have seen if I were tired and scared in a place where the land can often make jokes out of men. But this is the part that made it permanent. A week later, at 3:20 in the morning on a different highway, my phone lit up with a number that looked like mine with 2 digits reversed. I answered because fear makes you stupid and polite. A voice said, "Help," in that flat phone speaker way. Another voice said, "We need you." Then a third, definitely a teen boy, definitely trying on the shape of my name like a shirt, "Vern." I hung up and threw the phone against the passenger door. It didn't break. It made a sound in the marrow of the truck like a tiny choir tuning up. The cab filled, for 3 breaths, with the smell I know from crash sites. Hot coolant and pennies. There's something else. You can call this an extra, or an addendum, or the part one never tell because it changes how people look at me. On a Tuesday, I decided to go back in daylight the way a man goes back to an empty house to prove to himself the intruder was in his head. I told myself it was to leave a roadside cross for the idea of whoever didn't make it. I told myself any sentence that got me moving. The sky had that scrub blue you get when the wind has scoured everything loose. I found the mile-by feel. There were no gouges where a sedan had left the asphalt. There were no fresh tire marks baked into the dirt. But there were, in the switchgrass by the shoulder, 5 shallow depressions in a neat row, spaced like a hand could spread to make them, too even to be deer. Around each depression the blades were singed a color that wasn't burn brown so much as something pulled out, leached. I pressed my palm near one and felt a cold come up from the earth like a basement you aren't welcome in. A white pickup pulled over behind me. Not the volunteers. This one was plain, with a ranch brand magnet on the door. The man who got out had that same used-up back posture but younger. He asked if I was broke down. I said I was fine. He nodded and didn't leave, which is Wyoming for, "I'll stay until you prove you're fine." After a minute he said, "You see the lights out here at night?" I looked at him and considered the cost of honesty. I said once. He made a face like the sun got in his eyes. "My dad says don't stop," he said. "Says it's like a fishing lure for people." I wrote the phrase down as soon as he left so I wouldn't forget it, and so I would be sure I didn't invent it later to justify my fear. I started to change. Not in the fun sci-fi way. In the insultingly human way. I skipped an exit I meant to take because I was busy checking every fence line in my mirrors. I began to despise hazard lights, which is a sin for a man in freight. I stopped drinking coffee after midnight because the jitter layered on top of the other shaking made my handwriting look like I was trying to shout in cursive. I hung a St. Christopher medallion from the radio knob the way my mother used to, though I haven't believed in anything capitalized since 1999. I missed a turn into a depot in Rock Springs and had to back up half a mile because my head was in another county listening to a memory of a voice that didn't belong to air. The last time it happened to me was the night I quit. Not the same stretch of 287. A different piece of blacktop that might as well be the same if you squint your eyes. 3:15 and the world reduced to wing beat and tunnel. The heater fan making a sound I associated with childhood flu. Hazards ahead. A car at a bad angle. A shape moving the way memory moves. I felt my hand begin to signal. To slow. To set triangles. To be the man my dad raised. The other hand, call it survival, call it betrayal, reached up and took the napkin from the visor on which I'd written 325 and rubbed it between forefinger and thumb until it was a ghost. Then I kept going. I watched the scene slim past and go small behind me. A diorama the size of a hobbyist model, the red lights blinking so kind, so patient. My mouth formed the words I send to you now without thinking. Do not stop. I turned in my medallion and my fuel card a week later. My boss, a man who looks like a trucker should look. Big belly, small kindnesses hidden under cuss words, said, "We lose good drivers to bad wives and to good sense." I told him it was good sense. He didn't ask for details because he didn't want the duty of believing me. I took a job ferrying parts between the refinery and a maintenance yard in town. I still get on the highway, but I hustle home before midnight like a kid under curfew. Sometimes, out by the Walmart where the wind widens, I see hazard flashers in my periphery, and it's just a kid in a Civic being dumb. Sometimes it isn't there when I look. I don't slow down when it isn't there. That's part of the rule. Here are the pieces of advice I can give with my whole name attached. If you're on 287 north of Laramie, and the time starts with a 3 and the minutes are in the 20s, keep moving. If you must call it in, and you should, because you are not a monster, call from a distance where the bars come back. Use mile markers. Say possible injury accident, and scene feels unsafe. Do not describe the shapes that the sage makes when the wind changes temperature. Do not get out to be the hero the world keeps asking you to be. There are other men and women with badges and radios whose job it is to meet the worst parts of our nights. If they arrive and find nothing, don't argue with the absence. Let it be another mystery chalked on the slate of this place. If you do stop, because you couldn't help it, because your foot has its own conscience, use your lights the way a priest uses a candle. Keep one hand on your door. Watch how they move. That will tell you what you need to know faster than faces will. Not everything that looks like us has practiced being us enough to pass at 3 in the morning. Do not let them touch your vehicle. I don't know why I know that. Only that the teenager's fingers left the roof dimpled, and my bones still ache where the idea of that touch would have landed if I'd let it. If something in the sage begins to lower, that is not a shadow. Get inside your shell and let your engine be a friend. You're going to want to argue with me on the way this ends. You want the troopers to have found a body, a dashcam, a reason. I wanted that too. The reason is hunger, I think. And the method is bait that looks like the part of you that gets you out into the cold to do right. I put this here in the hopes that the part of you that does math and checks mirrors will be a little louder than the part that baptizes itself in other people's emergencies. If you think I'm lying, I'm glad for you. It's a safe place to stand. If you know what I'm talking about, you have my respect and my sorrow and my plea. Let the hazard lights blink alone. Let whoever is fishing pack up a different night. Go home to the people who know the true shape of your walk. If the phone rings at that hour and the voice on the other end sounds practiced but thin and knows your name the way a piece of paper knows ink, let it ring until the ringing forgets you. If you pray, pray the old prayers and add one new sentence. Let me not be bait. Sometimes I wake up with the taste of cold iron on my tongue and my hands curled like I'm still gripping a wheel. I don't drive that route anymore. I still take the long way around Laramie to avoid even seeing the sign for 287. It feels childish. It feels correct. And I keep the napkin, even rubbed to a smudge, tucked in the visor of a truck that now goes nowhere after midnight, because talismans matter out here whether you believe in them or not. If we pass each other at noon, and you see me look a beat longer into my side mirror than seems polite, That's me checking that the world behind me and the world ahead of me are the same world. That the sky hasn't been bitten. That the people waving on the shoulder are waving with elbows and wrists like ours. If you ever find yourself north of Laramie and the wind presses against your door and the red blink builds ahead of you like someone is practicing Morse code for stay, I hope you hear my voice in the way your foot lightens. Keep going. Call it in from far away. Let the scene shrink until it's something a different version of you might have stopped for. And if anyone asks you later why you didn't play hero, tell them Vern asked you not to. Tell them there are wrecks that aren't wrecks and survivors who don't need saving, and a dark above the sage that lowers itself down to collect whatever comes close. Tell them you had a good reason. Tell them you wanted to come home. Hello friends, my name's Creech. I pulled reefer and dry van for 27 years out of Independence, Missouri, with a detour through a paper mill job that wrecked my lungs just enough to keep me honest. I'm not the one in the family who tells stories. That's my sister, Luann. I keep receipts in a plastic shoebox and a spare pair of glasses in the glove compartment. I nap sitting up. I only cuss when I drop a ratchet strap on my toe. If you're watching this at home, thank you for being the kind of person who lets a stranger into your evening. If you're catching it from a bunk or a counter stool at some all-night, do me a favor, hit subscribe, tap the like, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I mean that part. I want to know the geography of who hears this, because what I'm going to tell you is anchored to a few square yards of tile and steel in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and if your wheels ever roll there after midnight, I want my voice lodged between your ears like a wedge under a door. I wasn't born scared of bathrooms. Later I learned that's what this did to me. Made me suspicious of drains, of wet tile, of the heavy smell of chemicals that should mean clean and instead means a cover-up. I hauled a load of seed corn out of Muscatine the night it happened, headed north to a distribution warehouse near Rochester, Minnesota. Lightweight, easy run. I was ahead of my hours and behind on sleep and figured I'd give myself a little mercy stop on the west side of Cedar Rapids to top off coffee and pee in a place that wasn't the side of the road. I'd been in and out of that town 100 times over the years and had a rotation of truck stops that won't make your wife divorce you if she sees the charges. One of them was Diesel King. No apostrophe, just a red crown on a battered sign that buzzed in winter. The kind of independent spot that's been there since a different color of paint and never joined a rewards program. If you know, you know. It was late enough that the world was turned way down, 3:30 something in the morning by the dash clock. That's always 2 minutes wrong. Snow wasn't falling, but you could smell it forming. That metallic, attic cold smell. The lot looked like every lot. Dark tractors tucked against the wind. A couple reefers beating time to their own private schedule. A bobtail parked crooked like the driver had reached the limit of his patience and his life at the same minute. Diesel King's canopy threw a sickly yellow light that didn't quite reach the edges. The sign hummed. The glass door had been cleaned recently with something that left streaks if you looked sideways. Inside I could see a woman behind the counter counting scratch-off tickets with the focus of a casino dealer. The coffee station had 2 orange-handled pots that promised decoff and lied. I pulled in, set my brakes. Always sets me at ease, that hollow thump. Killed the engine but left the key where I could get it with a muscle memory and climbed down into a wind that bit without theatrics. The smell hit me halfway across the lot. Not diesel, not fryer oil, not coffee, not the soft rot of a trash can that's seen too many hot dog wrappers. Chemicals. A cocktail of them. Pine-scented cleaner that's never met a forest, bleached loud enough to sting your nose. Something sweet and antifreezy under it, like a radiator leak, and a sharp, sour top note I had to learn later was lye. It made my eyes water before I got to the door. You smell strong cleaner at truck stops. That's a mercy. This was not that. This was someone trying to erase a smell you wouldn't forgive. The clerk looked up as I came in. She had that late-night look, tired but bright, makeup holding the line against shift work. Her name tag said Liz, and had been scratched with something sharp until the Z looked like a 2. I pressed my hand to the coffee pot out of habit. Hot enough. I told her I'd pay after I peed. She nodded, eyes going over my shoulder at the emptiness outside, and said, "Bathrooms down past the coolers." She added, like a joke she didn't expect me to laugh at, "Watch your step, janitor's mopping." That smell got stronger in the little hallway. You know the kind. posters for energy shots and a faded laminated flyer warning about human trafficking with the number to call if you saw something. Somebody had taped up a handwritten sign about washing your hands and added a smiley face that looked haunted. The closer I got to the men's door, the nearer that pine bleach live bouquet pressed to my throat. The light under the door flickered like a sidewalk neon reflected in a puddle. I pushed the door with my knuckles. If you've ever walked into a space that's half one thing and half another, where your brain has to choose which reality to stand in, you know how the floor feels. It was that. It was clean enough to see the circles a mop makes when someone works in a hurry. It was also wrong enough that my foot hesitated. The light stuttered. The urinals were those old porcelain kinds like a church basement would have, high-backed and earnest. The stalls had metal doors painted a beige, so old it was green. In the corner, by the janitor's closet, stood a yellow mop bucket with the squeezer bent like a jaw. A mop leaned in it, gray head fat with water. Its handle had been taped where someone broke it, and someone else didn't replace it. The drain in the center of the floor had a grate you could pry up with a coin if you were determined and reckless. I clocked all that in the way a driver does, recording the marks of use and neglect. It calmed me. Then the calm went away. Wet footprints. They were the first real wrong thing I let myself admit. Not mine. They went the other way, from the drain toward the stalls, darkening the tile with clean water, the way fresh mop water behaves. Bare feet, not shoe prints. That matters. Big as a man's foot, but longer at the arch, like the bones inside didn't take the curve the way ours do. 5 toes, a little too evenly spaced, as if taken from a diagram. The heel mark was soft around the edges, not the hard press you get from weight. And as I watched, deciding whether to pee or to leave or to laugh at myself and pee anyway, another wet step appeared between 2 of the ones already leading away. It didn't splash into being, it blossomed, the tile going from dry to wet in an oval that resolved into a foot. Then another, nearer the stall, like the walker had been interrupted while walking and was catching up with himself. "Sir?" I said before I meant to, because my mouth wanted a world where there was a sir in this bathroom. A mop made a slow, dragging sound. The kind of sound you hear outside of hearing, wood against metal, water being told where to be. It came from behind the half-open janitor's closet door. I saw a sleeve first, gray shirt with the pearl buttons you get on a cheap uniform, and a forearm that was exactly the way an arm is supposed to be if you don't look longer than a second. If you look longer than a second, you notice something else in the shape, like a second set of levers under the skin. The man who stepped out was tall and built like a remembered version of strong. His hair was crew-cut short in that might as well get rid of it way. His name patch said Eldon in stitched blue, the E missing its middle bar like it had been pulled off and resewn. He had a face you'd call kind before you found a better word. The eyes were set straight. The nose had been broken once and healed without a story. The mouth had the downturned corners of someone who spends long nights with themselves. "Closed," he said in a voice that could sand wood. "We're closed for cleaning." He smiled when he said it, like a habit, not like a choice. I glanced back at the door I had just come through. No closed sign, no cone. "Sorry," I said. "I just need a quick." I gestured at the urinal. "I'll be out of your hair." Eldon looked at the wet footprint that had bloomed after I entered, then at me, then at the drain. The way his head moved made me think of an old machine that runs smooth until it hits the part it can't do. His smile didn't move. He looked kind of like men look when they remember a younger brother that's gone and realize the memory still takes gas money. "Quick is good," he said. The sound of water moving below our feet made a low growl, like a distant truck downshifting under a hill no one else could see. I took the second urinal on the wall because I was a boy once and we learn our routines. I got myself started and tried to scroll my mind through a grocery list until this became a dumb story I told myself later, but the smell crawled up into the back of my throat and would not be translated into anything human. I heard the mop whisper behind me. I looked left at the cracked mirror that hung over the sink and wished I had not. You think you know your own face well enough that bad lights can't trick you. The mirror had a layer of scratches that made me a stranger. For a second, too, I saw my features slide a fraction like cheap laminate bubbles when the glue gets wet. I told myself the glass was flexing. I told myself I had the right to pee without thinking about the mutability of flesh. I concentrated on finishing. A burble came from the drain, not the gurgle of air moving through pipes. A burble, like a child trying not to giggle with their mouth closed. Eldon's mop made that slow press and pull. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was looking at the bucket and the door and the place where the wall met the floor, as if those places had secrets. The wet footprints near the stall gleamed. I realized something about them that the brain does not want to realize. The angle of the toes in a few of them was wrong for someone walking forward. They looked like someone backing in, or like a set of feet had been dragged in a pattern invented after the feet were made. Long night, I said, because that's what your mouth does when the rest of you has run out of useful. Eldon nodded. Always a long night at 3:30, he said. He said it like a Bible verse he'd learned before he could read. He wrung the mop with a long, hard pull that made the handle bow and the yellow ringer complain. The water that poured back into the bucket was dark. Dark like old tea. Dark like the bottom of a river. The smell got sharper, a top note like a hospital hallway, and underneath it something sweet and meaty that made my teeth itch. Clogs, he said to the water. Came in heavy. Always heavier this time of month. The urinal flushed itself, an old body's reflex. The water ran cold. There was a smear on the porcelain at knee level, the kind you get from a hand bracing. It was gray, not brown. I washed my hands longer than a man needs to, watching the soap work and not looking in the mirror. Eldon moved toward the drain, rolling the bucket. It made a sound like a suitcase being dragged up carpeted stairs. He set the mop aside and peeled the coin-sized screw cover off the drain with a practiced flick of a thumbnail. Under the grate the pipe went down and then sideways. Too much sideways. The kind of sideways that says the architect's drawing didn't include what the builder had to build around. The burble again, louder. A bubble rose in the deeper water and popped, throwing a bead that landed on my knuckles. It burned like you feel a burn when you can't tell if it's heat or cold. Should I said, gesturing at the door, halfway between a polite exit and a question I didn't know the words for. Quick is good, he repeated, but this time the words had a crowded texture, like someone speaking along with him 2 seats behind your ear. I dried my hands on the paper towel like it mattered to be a man with dry hands in a room where the floor had begun to breathe. I saw, warped in the scratched metal cover of the towel dispenser, that I was not alone. The stall door, the one where the wet prints led, had the kind of gap you could throw a dime through. Under it I could see the shadow of ankles. They weren't moving. The feet were too parallel, toes pointed just a little in, like a child told to stand proper and not knowing what that meant. I could tell. This was the worst of the small things. The toes pressed only lightly. No weight. Like the feet were there to suggest a person, not to bear one. Sir? I said again, because my father raised me to ask if someone needed help even when it was the wrong thing to do. You okay in there? The answer came so softly I could have told myself I didn't hear it. It hurts. A woman's voice and not. The vowel slid somewhere a human mouth doesn't slide unless taught. Eldon put his hand on the stall door. He didn't push. He looked at me with that steady smile that was a reflex and said, "It's okay. She's leaking." He tapped the door with one knuckle. The sound came back a half second too late, like the door had to ask permission to make it. We'll have it cleaned quick. Quick is good. The floor under my boots felt like it had gained a layer. Not a liquid layer. This wasn't a flood. A membrane is the word, and I hate it. The tile had another truth whispering against it, and my soles registered both. I glanced at the open janitor's closet. Behind the cinder block wall, I could see bins, plastic domes of chemicals with their tubes leading to a pump, the kind restaurants used to meter and sanitizer. The labels were sun-bleached and new at once. Pine Shine, Accelerator, Odor OFF, and one with a skull and crossbones that looked, this is a fool thing to say, hand-drawn, as if the pictogram wasn't part of the original design and someone had added it as a favor. The tubes went into the wall and down, and the wall around the entry holes had gone a darker shade. The way moisture stains, but this wasn't moisture. The tubes thrummed. The sound was like a heart would be if you'd never heard one and someone described it wrong, and you built a heart from the description anyway. There's a move you learn as a driver when you've got a bad situation. You keep your voice in neutral and your feet in first gear. "I'll get out of your way," I said. "Pay for my coffee and leave you to it." "Quick is good," Eldon said for a third time, and this time when he said it the mirror didn't show his mouth match the words. For a heartbeat, too. The face in the glass slid a half-inch to the left and wore a different set of creases. I was looking at a man named Eldon. The mirror showed a man named something else. Not as if two people stood there. As if the name had shuffled inside the face. I pulled the door, and the hallway beyond pinched in my vision the way a tunnel does when your blood pressure goes down. The human trafficking flyer snagged my sleeve like a hand. I do not mind telling you I nearly ran. I got to the counter with my coffee, and the clerk looked up and then away fast, like she'd been caught thinking hard about steak knives. 302, she said. Do you want a lid? You get a lot of cleaning in there, I said. I don't know what I meant to learn by saying it. She kept the smile the way night clerks keep the light. We like it clean, she said. Health department, you know. Then, as if the script called for it. You pass through here often? Often enough, I said. Name's Dub. She nodded at the name and put it nowhere. I like that name, she said. You be careful. We had a pipe go last week. The way they lay everything out under this place makes messes you wouldn't believe. Her fingers flicked unconsciously at her throat, as if she wore a necklace that wasn't there anymore. She had a little scar just under the jawline, tidy and white. You get those from surgery or from a cut someone cleaned too late. City's always on us, she said. Codes, codes, codes. I paid. The register printed out a receipt that said DL King number 3 and a date that looked right if you didn't count too closely. The minutes in the timestamp were 32 when my body swore it had been 38 outside. I put the paper in my pocket and later, at home, the paper would say a different minute. If I tell you that now you'll think I'm making it cute. I'm telling you anyway. Out in the lot the wind had picked up and the air had that silent electricity before a snow that sticks. I put my hand on the truck like you put your hand on a friend's shoulder to remind both of you where you are. I climbed in. I set the coffee in the holder with the cracked plastic ring. I put the key in and sat with my foot on the brake and listened to the building. That sounds wrong. How do you listen to a building? Diesel King hummed in 2 notes. One was the standard rooftop HVAC unit being overworked. The other came from underground. I could feel it through my seat like a subwoofer nobody asked for. The best I can do to describe it is say it sounded like plumbing running backwards. On the way out, because I am an idiot who has to poke the bruise, I took a slow pass along the side of the building. The cinder block wall had an old inspection sticker by a steel door. It had been scrubbed and re-stickered so many times the layers looked geological. The newest layer said, approved, in that bird grade font that makes you feel better until you look at the date. The date was a Thursday 3 weeks from whatever night it was. I stopped, put the truck in neutral, set the brakes, and stared at that for too long. My breath fogged the glass. A light inside that steel door brightened, dimmed, brightened again, like a person in a hospital bed learning to breathe on their own. I told myself about timers. I told myself about motion sensors. I put the truck in gear and left because staying was a different verb than I wanted to learn. A man can ruin his own life for a while with nothing but a search bar. I drove to Rochester, did my drop, slept terrible, and the next day found myself reading old articles about code violations in Cedar Rapids like I was studying a map to an enemy's house. There were, it turns out, plenty. None said Diesel King. A few said motor fuel retailer on West Side, and described, in as much detail as the law allows, grease traps overflowing and wastewater improperly routed. There were building permits filed for a remodel that was approved and then reapproved 6 months later with the same dollar figure and different line items. An OSHA citation had been issued in 2004 to a contractor named Northline Janitorial Services for insufficient training on chemical handling. The address on the citation was AP.O. box that, according to the internet, now belonged to a church that never met. You could read that as paper trails, as the way small businesses survive. You could read it as the places where a story wore its skins raw. By habit and disease, I went looking where we all go looking when we want to bully ourselves with other people's lives. Forums that should have died. Road Hall Talk. CDL Chat. A Facebook group with a name that tried to sound like a union and wasn't. Most of it was noise. One thread stuck like a splinter. Cedar Rapids diesel stop bad water smell. The OP had one post ever. The post was from 2017. The first reply was a guy who'd worked HVAC saying, "That's vent stack failure." The second was a woman who used to run nights through there saying, "You always smell like pine and bleach if you use the bathroom. The mop guy is nice though." That was it. 2 replies on a forum where nonsense gets 50 comments about nothing. I should have let it be a smell and a mop and a thing in the night that annoyed a tired man. But it nagged. 2 weeks later I was back down that way. I told myself I'd stop at the pilot like a sensible person. I had to see. I turned into Diesel King at 3:25 a.m. because apparently I've never learned. The lot was a little fuller this time. A Freightliner with a cartoon of a wolf on it idled like it had asthma. A guy in gym shorts stomped around his trailer because his sanity had flaked off and he was trying to shake it back on. The sign buzzed. The smell hit me like a slap. Pine and bleach and sweet. Inside, Liz wasn't there. A man with a beard that looked applied sat behind the counter and watched a small television playing a game show from the afternoon. He didn't look up. I could hear the mop, that drag and press. The bathroom door had a cone out now. Floor wet. The cone was pristine in a way cones never are in places like this. It had the kind of shine new things have the first week, when they reflect light like they've been promised something. I nudged it aside with my boot and let myself in because a cone is a warning and a dare. The wet footprints were all the way to the door this time. Some were half-printed, the toes not quite committed to the tile. The drain made a noise that went up my spine and sat in my teeth. Eldon stood over the open grate. He had a tool I recognized as a closet auger, but longer, and it was threaded into the pipe like he was pulling a fish out of a well. He didn't sweat. He didn't breathe in a way you could clock. He looked up at me, and his smile clicked on like a motel lamp. "Quick is good," he said. "I can come back," I said. "Pilot's just up the road." "It's fine," he said. "You came on time." I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. On time for what? I asked him with my eyebrows. He laughed. The sound of a mop handle knocked off a wall slowly. "For the feed," he said, and there wasn't room enough in my throat for air after that. "It comes heavy, then light, then heavy. That's how it goes. That's how it is kept." "What feeds?" I said, even though I didn't want to know. "The lines," he said. "The building." He looked like a man proud of his lawn. "We got old pipes here. New pipes, too. The city laid a set. We laid another. The old ones go down where the new ones can't go. That's how we keep it busy. Busy is good." He wrung the mop, and the water in the bucket looked darker than water gets. And the smell coming off it had that copper penny note I wish I didn't recognize from anything. He nodded toward the stall. The feet were visible under the door again. I could see the side of a heel. It had no skin texture. No pores. Smooth like carved wax. "Sir," I said into the gap, because I am a man built of habits. "Do you need?" "We help," Eldon said. "We always help. That's what a janitor is. We keep it neat." He fed the auger farther into the pipe. I watched his arm move. The sleeve rode up. The skin at the wrist was mottled, not like dirt, but like the pattern of light underwater. Here is where I should have left. Here is where I should have backed out and thrown my coffee in the trash and put the truck in gear and never come back. Instead, I said, "How long you been working here, Eldon?" His face changed in a way that wasn't movement. It was like the room changed around the face. He considered the question like a gentleman at a diner considers pie. "Since the spill," he said. "What spill?" I asked. Outside, the world felt very far away. The trucks I could see through the little safety window above the tile might have been painted on a backdrop. "In 87, he said, and the number 1987 fell into the world like a coin into a well. "Back of the lot. Tanker cracked. They came with suits like spacemen. Dug and dug. We had to close." He smiled the way men smile when weather ruined their crop and they learned an additional kind of math. "We never closed now. The light did a thing then. You've seen flicker. This was not that. The fluorescence didn't strobe. The room did. For a snap, just long enough to be seen. The bathroom was the ghost of itself. Tiles dark with age, one urinal cracked like a smile missing a tooth, stall door hanging drunk, a fine white powder dusting the baseboards. A big red condemned notice on the mirror with the city's seal cockeyed. The smell was different in that flash, flat, old, like a museum with the windows shut. And then it wasn't. The lights were steady again. The mop bucket was yellow. Eldon's name patch read E.L. Dawn, the hyphen a stitch in the cloth, and the auger in his hand tugged at something below us that tugged back. "I'm going to go," I said. "I got a clock to keep." He nodded. "Quick is good." The smile slipped, and behind it was tiredness, so pure I have to call it clean. "If you come back," he said without looking at me, "come before 3:33. We feed after that." I went out through the hall like a man coming up from a pool he didn't know he dove into. The counter clerk was the bearded man again. The small TV still showed bright people clapping about money. "You see the game?" he asked me, as if there was only one. I shook my head. "We're out of day-olds," he said, like a confession. "Truck's late." I said I wasn't hungry and then bought a Danish because the part of me that wants to please strangers is a curse. I left. I drove north on 380 with my lights just a click lower than anyone would advise, and turned the radio to a station with a preacher who shouted about what you should put under your children's pillows. I didn't hear a word of it. I listened to the water in the walls of the truck I love, and though there is no water in the walls of a Kenworth worth mentioning, I heard something finding its way. When a thing has fingerprints in your head, you start to see them everywhere. Over the next month, I noticed how many places used the same pine something cleaner and how my stomach took a step toward the door every time I smelled it. I noticed how a restroom drain gurgles different in Amarillo than in Moline and how only a fool keeps a list. I went 2 weeks without stopping at Diesel King. Then I went in the daytime, thinking light would act like facts. It was 3 in the afternoon, honest cold, sun with no teeth. The building wore the same skin. The sign hummed softer. Inside, Liz was back. Daylight made her seem more from here. I asked for a coffee to sit with, and she said, "On the house," like the company had told her to say that to foster loyalty. I walked the hallway. The bathroom smelled like a bathroom. The mop bucket was in the closet. The drain had its cover screwed in neat. There was a sticker on the wall by the sink, crisp and real, that said, "Inspected by City of Cedar Rapids, December 15th, 1987/R inspect 30 days. I ran my finger over it and felt ink so new it hadn't stuck to the adhesive right, edges lifting like it wanted to say something else. In the lot I met a driver who said his name was Rake. He was the successful kind of liar who tells you exactly as much truth as you need to know. He said, "You stopping there after midnight?" I said I had. He nodded toward the building. "Don't," he said. "My cousin went in there in '02 when it was boarded up." I told him not to. The boards were on, and he still went in. Came out an hour later and said they got new mops. 2 weeks after that he quit running nights and said water sounded wrong. He laughed to show me he wasn't afraid. The laugh did not convince either of us. I tried to get official. I put in a request with the city for inspection records because I'm the kind of idiot who thinks paper will make him brave. What came back was redacted where it didn't need to be. Boxes checked and unchecked in ways that said a printer had hiccuped. A photocopy of a notice from 2002 that said unsafe in block letters and a hand-scrawled note. Kitchen okay. Diesel King didn't have a kitchen. The letterhead said Department of Building Services in a font a computer would be embarrassed by. At the bottom, in ballpoint blue added later, was a phone number you could tell someone wrote from memory. I called it. It rang 6 times, and a woman answered with a last name only and said she'd left the department in 1999. When I said Diesel King, she said, "Oh," like a toe hit a table leg. Then she said, "Do not go in there after close," like she was telling me not to drink under a sink. I asked when close was. She hung up. Here is the part one don't put in job apps. I went back one last time with the stupid, selfish intention of getting proof. Not for fame. No one wants Diesel King to be their big break. For myself. So that when I told my sister and my buddy Charlie and the girl who cuts my hair and asks where I've been, I could point and say, "See." The dash cam was already on because I leave it on to keep the insurance company from pretending they don't owe me. I pulled in at 328 and sat where I could see the door. The glass reflected the lot. It also reflected something else. Every so often, as the sign flickered, the words condemned bloomed backward under the Diesel King logo and then vanished, as if 2 pictures had been printed on the same film and were fighting for priority. I brought myself into the bathroom with a vague plan to film the drain. That sentence looked stupid outside of my head. Inside, it was an oath. The smell was full and physical, like a handshake you can't refuse. Eldon was there, of course. He stood with his boot on the grate, and the mop held like a rifle. His smile was off. The room knew I'd brought a camera in my pocket, and the room didn't care. "You shouldn't," he said without turning. "It doesn't like to be seen." "What is it?" I asked. I kept my phone in my pocket and hit record through the fabric, as if I could trick the air. He looked at me then with that tired, clean tiredness. "It's the lines," he said. "They put them under us, and we put ours under theirs, and there's only so much down, and then you go sideways and sideways goes places. There's old stuff down there. Groundwater, yes. Storm water, yes. Old tanks, too. Rooms no one knows anymore. You can feed a lot of places through a pipe if you're careful. It all comes through here because here is low enough to call it." "Call it," I said, and the word didn't like my mouth. "A janitor," he said, as if that answered the question. "We keep it clean." The drain made a sound I will hear when I die. Below us something shifted. The wet footprints appeared again, one after another, neat as a clerk stamping a form. The stall door hiccuped and then shut itself without moving through the middle. My phone burned against my thigh, recording 40 minutes of fabric with a soundtrack of mops and air. I looked at the mirror. The glass didn't flex. It showed the room at a slant that included my shoulder and Eldon's elbow, and in the doorway that led to the hallway, and then to the store, and then to the night, a crowd. Not in the room. In the mirror. The reflection was busier than the air. People you couldn't see when you looked straight on, hanging around the door like folks at a bar deciding whether to go outside and smoke. The longer I looked, the more I saw, and the more I saw, the less I knew what seeing meant. A woman in a denim jacket. A man in a ball cap with a seed company logo from the 80s. A kid in a hoodie. Hands. Hands on the jam that didn't turn the corner into real. They were all a half-inch deep in glass. I left. I am not ashamed of that. I left like I had walked into the wrong church. I left like I had been warned, and the warning came too late and still mattered. I paid for nothing. The bearded clerk watched me go with a mouth that wanted to be a door. The cold outside grabbed my ears like a grandparent. I climbed into my truck and clicked the lock and felt stupid for clicking the lock and better for it anyway. I started the engine and told myself I would look at the dash cam and I would see the reflection of the sign arguing with itself, and that would be my proof. And it is a small kindness to say the file was corrupted, because the part of me that believes in mercy hopes that was mercy. The timestamp freezes at 3 hours, 33 minutes, and 6 seconds. The rest is color static that moves like water. I stopped running the Cedar Rapids lane at night. Money got thinner, my nights got thicker. I started noticing the way drains and other bathrooms talk when no one is pushing water through them. I started hearing mops in dreams, the soft wet of them, the reliable press, and the more reliable return. I called Diesel King once at 3 in the afternoon to ask if Eldon was on shift. "We don't have an Eldon," Liz said, like a line read in a play. "We have an Elgin. He's off." I said thanks and hung up and sat in a lot somewhere in Illinois holding the phone like it was the only thing keeping me on this side of the ground. Here's what I know, and it isn't enough. In 1987, there was a spill behind that building. You can find the article if you look, and you won't because you have a life. The words used are not alarming unless you've been told to be alarmed. Minor release. Contained. Remediation ongoing. Affected soils. In 2002, a city inspector died in a winter pileup on 380 on his way to a job he never got to. The file for that job says unsafe and has no follow-up. In 2004, a janitorial contractor that no longer exists got a fine big enough to hurt small, not big enough to change big. In 2017, a woman on a forum no longer running said the mop guy was nice. In 2019, the building was temporarily closed for maintenance, on a flyer with a stock photo of a smiling wrench. In 2023, I smelled the scarcest thing in the world, a place trying to erase itself and the part that won't let it. I moved to days and thought I had outlived it. Then my sink at home started making a noise when nobody was using it, not a gurgle, a breath. The water that comes out is clear and tested and tastes like every Midwestern town that lays its pipes across fields and calls it good. I changed my P-traps because I needed to do something with my hands. I scrubbed the underside of drains with a toothbrush I'll never use for teeth. I mopped my own kitchen floor with vinegar like my mother, and when the mop squeaked across tile my eyes stung because the squeak was right and wrong. I added a line to grace, same as a man you've already heard. Keep the water clean and the drains dumb. I stopped wearing headphones in truck stop bathrooms because I needed to hear if something wanted to be heard. Do not stop at Diesel King after 3:30. You think that's dumb advice? It's simple enough to try. If you smell pine and bleach and a sweetness like antifreeze and pennies at once, if your eyes water before the door, go somewhere else. If you go in anyway because we all do the thing we told ourselves not to, and a man with a stitched name smiles at you with a face that reads like a label someone peeled off and put on again crooked, pee quick and get out. If you hear a burble in a drain that makes you think of a laugh, don't wait to see if it becomes a laugh. If you see wet bare footprints appear where there were none, don't test them with your fingers. If a woman's voice behind a stall door says it hurts, do not be the hero. There are hurts you can fix with paper towels and mercy. There are hurts that are hooks. Call the city from the lot, from far away, in daylight, using a name that isn't yours. If you own a place with pipes, don't feed them anything you wouldn't pour into your throat. You think that's a folksy way of saying don't dump fryer oil? I wish it were. I mean this, the ground remembers. It makes a ledger. It keeps what is sent down until it has enough to send back. And if you run a mop for a living, if you move messes from where people see them to where they believe they're gone, you are a holy person, and I'm sorry the job made you a priest without telling you. Sometimes I park behind the Hy-Vee near my apartment and sit where the snowplows scrape, and I listen to the big sewer grate out back. It sings a little after rain. Everything does. When it does, I think about Eldon and about how tired his smile was beneath the smile he wore, and I wonder if people become names in places like that, and if the names become jobs, and if the jobs become the only way to make what's under us behave. I wonder if he asked for help, and the help looked like a mop and a key and a patch on an old shirt. I wonder what they feed and what it looks like when it's satisfied. I don't want to know, and I do, which is how you end up telling strangers on the internet about a bathroom and a bucket and losing the courage to close your eyes in the shower. If this reaches you in a place that smells like pine and bleach, where pine and bleach ought to be a kindness, think of me. Picture a tired man with 2 pairs of glasses and a pocket full of advice you didn't ask for, and do the thing my body did too late. Keep moving. Pay at the pump. Save the coffee for a place you can see both exits. If someone tells you quick is good, believe them and make it quicker. And if a door ever shows you a reflection of a crowd you can't see when you turn around, do not turn around. That is not for you. That isn't a crowd. That is the shape of the drain teaching itself to speak. I quit nights last December. The paperwork says schedule preference. The truth says I'm worn out from pretending not to listen to water. I still pass Cedar Rapids twice a month, and the sign for Diesel King still hums, and sometimes it's off, and sometimes it's on, and sometimes it is both between blinks. I keep my eyes on the road. When the radio fades and the heater gives that wet rattle, and the snow makes the world a room, I say hello to a man named Eldon who doesn't exist anywhere you can point, and I say goodbye, and I say thank you for keeping it clean, even if I don't know what it is. Then I drive by. Then I keep going. If you ever have to stop there, do it at noon. If you ever stop there at 3:33, don't tell me. I want to think you didn't. Hello, friends. My name is Aught Billings, short for August, my mama's joke about me never showing up on time. And I hauled flatbed out of Farmington, New Mexico, most of my good working years. I ran steel out of Pueblo, pipe out of Midland, the odd agricultural implement that made small-town sheriffs point and ask for a second escort. I'm not superstitious, or I wasn't, unless you count the way I always tapped the dash twice before rolling after an inspection and never parked under a dead light. If you're watching from home, thank you for letting a stranger into your evening. If you're listening from a sleeper somewhere in the Four Corners, hit the subscribe and drop a comment telling me where you are. I want to picture the line of places this story touches. And if you ever find yourself alone on U.S. 191 in the desert hours, and a white car sits perfect as a showroom model on the shoulder, and a woman waves like a roadside blessing, keep your wheels true and keep going. I'm asking you as plain as I know how. I was northbound out of Chinley the night it happened, empty and half proud about it, because I'd beaten a receiver who liked to close his gate early when he saw out-of-state plates. The date was a Tuesday in late May, after the wind had done its meanest, and before heat made the road glitter with mirages. My run had been piped down to St. John's and back. An easy day if you pretended the 2 stoplights in Sanders were a city, and if you remembered where the reservation speed changes bite, because the troopers out there will tax your impatience right out of you. I had a thermos of coffee that tasted like scorched pecans and a bag of gas station burritos I knew better than to eat all at once. The sky had gone moonless the way a black coat goes shiny at the elbows. Numbers on the dash said 3:06 a.m. The CB was dead except for the kind of hiss that makes you think of old TV snow. The first strange thing wasn't the woman, or the car, or the crowd. It was the stillness. If you've driven 191 through that stretch between many farms and Mexican Hat, you know the feeling of the desert breathing, a low, steady movement in the sage and the cheatgrass like an animal sleeping. That night the plants looked like they'd been lacquered into position. No wind, no bugs on the glass, no flutter of anything at the edge of the beam. I eased off the accelerator to let the truck hum in that content gear where all the rattles cancel each other out, and it was like someone had taken their hand off my shoulder. Then my headlights caught the white. It wasn't one of those sun-shocked cars you see out there dying for good. This was a white that had ideas about itself. A newish sedan. No plates, no dealer tag either. Parked on the northbound shoulder perfectly parallel to the fog line. Tires all squared to the world like it had practiced. The hood was up, but up in the way a hood is in a commercial, not the way a hood is when smoke teaches you new words. The paint reflected my lights too clean. A woman stood near the driver's side, facing the road. Hand up, palm out. Halt, hello, help. All the meanings wrapped into one. She had the kind of hair that doesn't belong in deserts, black and heavy like water, not a strand out of place. Light hit her and came back like it had found a best friend. I slowed because I am the kind of fool who tries to believe in other people's moments of need. You don't run nights without stopping for somebody's radiator or somebody's wet kid or somebody's dog that leapt out of a window a mile back. In my mirror, the line of my trailer and the shoulder looked like a ruler set on velvet. I tapped the brakes twice to make sure the car behind me. There wasn't one. Saw what I intended, and I eased toward the white. She smiled when she saw my intention. I could see that from 60 yards. It was a smile like a magazine cover. Teeth uniform and not bright. That's not right. Just even. There's a difference between genuine relief and the idea of relief played by a face. This was a face that wanted to be seen forming the correct shapes. She wore a summer dress that didn't move. A color that made me think of those pale green candies my grandmother kept in a dish like a threat. Bare legs. Shoes I would have called flats if you'd asked me to testify in court. No dirt on the hem. No dust on the shoes. Her posture, even alone on that empty road, said hostess. I cracked the passenger window 2 inches. Never all the way. Never open your cab to the world at this hour if you don't know what you're letting in. You okay? I said over the engine. I kept my foot on the brake enough to keep the rig arguing with itself about whether to move or stay. My hand found the air horn cord and held there, the way believers hold a rosary. My car, she said, and her voice traveled too far. No strain, like a singer under a band shell. Not loud. Present. I think it's the belt. She let out a little laugh at that, the laugh people use to align themselves with your good opinion. I was hoping you'd stop. I was told you would. You called somebody? I asked, already hating the way my mouth was being helpful without requiring proof. AAA? Navajo Police. You got service out here? Her eyes. There are eyes that reflect your lights and eyes that seem to generate some of their own. These were the second kind. Does your phone work? She said, like she was asking about the weather. We can use yours. I don't need to tell you that every caution lecture I'd ever heard flapped its wings inside my skull. Who told you I'd stop? I asked. She tilted her head, not coy exactly, like she was trying the gesture for the first time. The rules, she said, of the road. She said it with the same certainty as someone reciting a prayer learned at 5. Men in trucks stop for women at night. It's safe if you do it right. I felt something in my foot let off the brake a hair and put it back down hard. If you've never noticed your own muscles obeying a stranger's idea before, you won't know the shame of it. The taillights glowed off the hood of her car, so evenly the red looked painted on. I looked past her, and that's when I saw them. At first they were a suggestion in the flat dark. Then my headlights made a curtain out there, and the curtain had shapes behind it. The desert didn't have people in it. It had the idea of people made into a pattern. A dozen at least. Maybe 2 dozen. Maybe more. Spread out in a loose crescent behind the car, 30, 40 yards into the scrub, all standing exactly the way a certain sort of person stands when you ask them to stand naturally for a photograph, and they forget how to be a body. Some had their arms at their sides. Some held their hands clasped in front, like pallbearers on break. All were turned toward the highway. All were very still, faces fixed toward my cab. I didn't see clothes so much as silhouettes, the edges too clean as if cut out of something stiff. No one shifted weight. No one scratched their cheek or swatted a bug or stepped on a thorn and cussed. The longer I looked, the more the wrongness put on details. One seemed to have hair too long for windless air to hold so straight. Another's hat, if it was a hat, sat too deliberate on a head that looked a shade narrow where heads should be round. My hands went cold and slick in that order. Those your people? I asked, and I meant it as a joke to shame myself back in a good sense, and it came out flat and scared. She didn't look behind her. She looked at me with a warmth that read like a painting of warmth. "They're watching out for me," she said. "You're very kind to stop. I should have left then. I know that now. But there's a hook sunk deep under the jaw of a man who's been handed 1,000 rules about decency, and one of those rules says you do not leave someone at night on a road with no one else. Another rule says if you are going to leave, you at least get a name to report. What's your name?" I asked. She took a breath the way actors do when they are about to deliver a line they've practiced and like hearing the sound of. "Vern," she said, and the word was like a word from a book read aloud too many times. "I'm Vern. You know how when you drop a plate in a quiet kitchen, there's an instant before the crash where your body already thinks the shape of the noise? My mind did that with the name. It hit a shape I'd seen before. Vern. I couldn't place it because fear ties knots in your filing system. I reached for my phone with my left hand without looking down. I didn't mean to show it. I meant to feel if there were bars. The screen lit my cab with a glow that made my mirror show my face too bright. As the light hit the glass, something moved in the white car's windshield. Not a reflection, not an occupant. The windshield clouded for a second, milky, as if breath had fogged it from inside. Shapes like fingertips, too many, pressed for a heartbeat, and then were gone. "Okay," I said, smiling like a liar. "I'll call. You stay by the car." "Can you get out?" she asked. She didn't step closer, but her voice did. I felt it near my ear, and the window was still only 2 inches down. "It's safer if you get out. That's the rule." Every childhood warning and the echo of every story old men tell at truck stop counters about bait and about the pride that gets you punched in the temple crawled up my spine. "Another truck's coming," I said. "Safer if I move off." I didn't hear anything yet. I just said it. And then the desert, obliging like it does if you speak first, answered at a distance with the faint whine of another rig somewhere south, a note too high to be comforting. I don't believe in manifesting. I do believe in roads choosing what to send you. "You don't have to move," she said, and the smile got full like a tide. "You're already perfect. Stop here. Put your hazards on. I'll come to your side. We do it that way." That was where the rules part got to me. People who really need help do not speak, and we do it that way. People with scripts do. My dad taught me something once that had no poetry in it, and has saved me more than any prayer. When your stomach drops without a reason you can name, assign it a reason anyway, and obey it. "I'm going to roll," I said. "I'll call from up the road." I took my foot off and almost put it back down because my hands started to act like someone else's hands. Tiny muscles in my fingers tried to open. My elbow tensed to reach for the door. Between one heartbeat and the next, I had the sense of a dozen pairs of feet shifting in the dark behind her, not moving forward, just adjusting to an angle, like a crowd preparing to encircle something that will be exactly this big and not 1 inch more. The truck far south leaned on its horn, not the long, angry one, the 2 short taps we give each other to say you exist. That sound cut thin and true across the miles, and it broke whatever polite shape had started to harden around me. I put the rig in gear, and the old girl, she was a Peterbilt that year with miles that read like a veteran's ribbons, did what I asked. As I rolled, the woman's smile didn't falter. That's what I remember more than anything. It didn't come tight the way smiles do when people lose what they thought they had. It held. She gave me a little wave like you give a parade from a porch. The crowd behind her wasn't there, and then it was there. The desert does that trick with distance where a person can change scale in your eyes 3 times in a second because the dark doesn't have landmarks. One shape stepped closer to the road, and then all of them were closer by the same amount. Not following me, not chasing, just adjusting their circle to include where I would have to be if I were compelled to stop by whatever had tried to make me. My trailer's tail brushed the fog line, and I corrected with a motion I'd learned 30 years ago, avoiding a rabbit in Missouri. The white cars had stayed lifted and clean and false as a set on a stage. I didn't floor it. You don't floor it on reservation roads in the middle of the night unless you want to explain to a very calm officer why you let fear borrow your common sense. I let speed happen steadily and watched the mirror. The white shape receded, and the crowd became cutouts, and then became a smear. And then the desert went back to being a picture of a place where nothing happens. The truck from the south came over the low rise, a blue Kenworth with a cattle pod, running empty from the sound of it, a sadness to that noise that you learn. He blipped his horn again, short, friendly, and then, here is the part that made me learn to love men I had never met. He held it a hair longer as he passed the white car, a warning and a question in the same breath. 5 miles on, my hands shook. I pulled into the little dirt pullout by a ruin of a billboard that used to sell tires to people who wanted them white-walled. I put my brights on the sage and killed them, put them on again, like I was shuttering a lantern. My phone had 2 bars, and then 1, and then 2. I called the Navajo police number I have from 1,000 posted signs, and the woman who answered sounded like bone-deep midnight and professionalism you've got to respect. I told her a version of it that sounded like a decent man not losing his composure. Woman on the shoulder, white car, crowd in the brush, mile marker, between 481 and 482, I think, northbound. I said it felt wrong. I said I could be crazy. She asked 3 questions that were better than any I had asked myself. Did I see plates? No. Did I see an injury? No. Could I safely return to put hazards out? Not without lying to her and myself. She said a unit would check. She thanked me like I had done exactly what was needed and not one bit more. I promised myself that if I heard sirens I would keep going anyway. I did not want to see the sirens stop there and then nothing be there when they did. I made Monticello by dawn and parked in back of the Maverick where you can watch the grain silos turn pink and pretend the world has only one layer. I poured coffee from my thermos into my cup and watched my hands not spill, and that felt like a miracle. I told myself a story that would let me continue driving without shaking. A woman had a wrong kind of friends. I had chosen not to be the sort of fool who gets stabbed for his gallantry. The end. I called my eldest, Marnie, and asked after her boys, and I did not tell her that I had thought I was about to be taken apart and reassembled around a rule I didn't invent. She would have cried. I would have too. I could leave it there, but I didn't. That name, Vern, nagged. Names are hooks. They keep stories from sliding away. In Green River that afternoon, waiting on a backhaul that turned into a cancellation that turned into a discount, I found a corner table, bought the diner's least insulting lunch, and did what every person at a corner table does now. I searched the parts of the internet that feel like a back room in a library. Not just the obvious. In this world, the obvious is polished and curated and optimized out of the parts you truly need. I went to threads with names like Weird West and Roadwatch, and those trucking groups where the banner picture is always a rig on a mountain road that no longer exists. I searched Fern 191 white car. I got a guide to Wildflowers, a motel in Idaho, and then a forum post from 2015 written by an account with no posts before or after, headlined, "Do not stop for the Fern." The grammar was plain and flinty, and the details were wrong in ways that made them feel right. White car near mile 483. Woman smiling too much. People just off the road whose feet made no noise. That last bit reached in and scratched the part of me I'd been trying to keep smooth. There were replies. Half the men made themselves brave by being cruel. Spam, troll, get off the internet. You've embarrassed yourself. One was from someone with the handle Roadchapel who wrote, "She used to be at 163 by the river. Heard they moved her up when construction started. The watchers got new rules." That word, rules, again. A woman with the username Bighorn Mom said her husband had seen the white car 3 times in 10 years, and that in their family they called it the test. She'd heard her grandfather call it Fern before 1979. She didn't know why. She said he kept a little spiral notebook listing nights and times, and that sometimes the white car stayed exactly 33 minutes in a night, and other times 7, and once it was 9 hours and 7 minutes, and he drank coffee on the porch and watched the road and said, "No one should make it that easy to fail. Too much internet will make you believe you've learned what you haven't." I put the phone down and felt worse. I sat there twisting the cap on my thermos until it squealed. An older man at the counter with a face built for weather turned and looked at me the way men look when they can tell you're holding something under your tongue. "You got the white car?" he asked. Not a question like a question like a ritual. "What do you know about it?" I said back, "You learn to match tone out here." He shrugged like the desert shrugs. "Everything and nothing." "You saw it," he said. "That's what matters." He turned back to his eggs and said, "To the plate. Don't stop for Fern." I could have left it at that. I should have. But you don't walk past a snake twice to see if it'll strike the second time. You know what I did. 2 nights later, I put myself on that road at the same hour. I told myself the line men tell right before they get hurt. This time I will do it carefully. I drove southbound in case direction mattered, and because the hard part of bravery is often just doing the opposite of what you did last. Mile markers ticked like a metronome for a song I didn't want to learn. The desert was stretchy and mean with absence. At 3:11 a.m., I killed the radio and listened. I could hear my engine, my fan, a rattle I would have to fix or learn to love, and under that, don't believe me. It won't hurt me if you don't. A sound like a crowd being polite. Not loud, not even present, like the memory of it hanging low. The white car was not at 482. It was at 479. Put up, the woman standing, the smile waiting in the tongue. I didn't slow this time. I did what a man does when the problem recognizably is himself. I kept 20 over the usual night pace, and I stared at the road as if it were the only thing left alive. She raised her hand without hurry. The crowd behind her was thicker, men in hats, a child too still, a woman with hair the shape of a cascade you see painted on the side of a bus, all arranged in a crescent whose radius did not change as my speed did. From my left mirror, I saw a pickup a quarter-mile back do what I had done 2 nights earlier, slow an apology. My mouth said, "Don't," out loud in the cab with nobody there to hear it. I laid on my air horn in one long and delicate line that made the desert have to be a place again. The pickup's headlights bobbled. Then he straightened and went by me so fast I felt the wake. He gave me the finger out the window in the thank you way we do out here. I made Mexican hat on adrenaline and stupidity and parked by the bridge to listen to the San Juan whisper over its rocks. When the world is big enough, the river sounds like radios tuned between stations. I leaned on the rail and shook. A rental sedan with California plates and a couple inside slowed, and the woman in the passenger seat took a picture of me and the bridge. And maybe there's a version of me living in someone's photo album under Utah. Weird man at night. I don't mind. If I am a warning to one person, it's a use only God will know how to count. You want an ending? Me too. I want to tell you I called the tribal police back, and they said, "We went to the mile marker, and we saw what you saw, and we set it on fire, and now you are fine." That's not what happened. I called. The same woman answered. She recognized the shape of my fear in my voice and said, again, that a unit would check. She told me to keep moving. She told me I did the right thing. I sat in the dark on a bench meant for tourists and promised a river my good behavior. 2 weeks later, a friend in Canta, goes by Tommy, drives a tanker and never says a thing until a thing must be said, messaged me a screenshot. A post on a local Facebook group that starts fights about fireworks every July. Someone had written, "White car at 191 millimeters, 481 last night. Girl waving. Folks in the brush. Don't stop." The comments were a mess of bravery and contempt that read like fear in men's jackets. One woman simply wrote, "My cousin stopped last year, and he stops at everything now." I read that a dozen times and understood it and did not want to. I started noticing the rules in other places. A kid with a gas can near Shiprock who never took a step toward my truck when I slowed a hair. A man on I-25 who tried to get me to exit at a closed rest area because his wife was having a baby, and when I said I'd call an ambulance, he started weeping in a rhythm like a looped clip. A trooper had at the dark edge of a construction zone that wasn't in the app, and I did what I do when I smell script. I called dispatch on an official number and said I wouldn't be a hero today. It's ugly to decide you won't be the hero. It's also why I am here. Here's the part that took the longest to admit. I went back in the daytime. Sun and tourists make liars out of last night's monsters sometimes, and that is a kind of mercy too. I pulled off near a turnout where saguaros start to give way to nothing and walked into the scrub where I remembered the crescent of watchers. The ground had impressions, but of course it did. Deer, antelope, the weird hollow a boot leaves when the heel strikes mud on a day 10 months ago. I found a cigarette, but that had been smoked down to the filter with the discipline of a man trying to keep his mind busy. The filter was old foam, the kind you don't see much anymore. I found a twist of white paint chip about the size of a thumbnail, and when I rubbed it between my fingers it stayed perfect, slick, not chalking my skin. It smelled like nothing you can buy at a hardware store. I bent to pick it up, and something in me said leave it. I'm not mystical. If you felt that feeling, you know why you listen. I drove to Bluff and sat with a woman who runs a trading post that sells Navajo rugs and belts, and the kind of small kindnesses people can afford when they want to pretend they have good taste. I bought a belt I didn't need and asked her if she'd ever heard of a woman called Vern on 191. She didn't look up at first. She smoothed the leather with the side of her hand, and then she said, "My grandma called her that. I don't know why. Don't stop." She handed me the belt and its paper and added, "Quieter than necessary. Even if the face looks like someone you know." That got to me. "Looks like someone you know." I repeated, and she shrugged in a way that meant we were finished with that part of the conversation. I took the hint. Outside, the sky had turned stupidly blue again, like it had auditioned and won the role. I keep lists now. It's a ridiculous thing for an old man to do, and I do it anyway. Nights when I see a white car anywhere near a fog line after midnight, and it is truly just a white car and someone with a real bad night, and I stop and make a call from a distance and maybe hand over a bottle of water out a window I don't ever quite open. Nights when I don't. Times when I pass 191 and say hello and keep my eyes a little higher than usual. I wrote the word Vern on a card and stuck it under the visor, and then took it down because I didn't like giving the name a room in my truck. I say it out loud sometimes, to make it small. Vern, Vern, Vern. A plant that needs shade and damp. A thing that can grow in a place where other things can't. I don't know if that matters. It helps me carry it. What do you do with this? If you run that road, do what the desert asks. Be gentle and mean it. If you see the white and the smile looks like approval and the voice sounds like it was designed to fit your ear exactly, keep going. Call from the next bar of service. List the mile. Say, possible motorist assist, and leave the decision to people with radios and partners and training for rules you don't have. If you stop because some part of you insists, and I won't call you a fool for that, because I am made of that same part, do not open your door. Do not say your name. Do not take hers. Do not step down and make a circle that will close around you. If there are watchers in the brush and they do not sway in the light breeze the air owes you, if they are mannequins waiting to be given reasons, do not furnish them with one. And if anyone on a forum tells you this is a test to prove whether you're a man, ask them if the desert has ever spoken their name back to them. If it hasn't, they haven't earned an opinion. Sometimes the phone rings around that hour with a number that looks like a local exchange, and the voice says, in a sweetness so pure you could pour it into coffee, "Sir, would you mind?" And the sentence doesn't finish because it doesn't need to. I let those go to voicemail because temptation wants a place to live and I won't pay that rent anymore. The messages are always empty. Road noise, a crowd far away. The click-click of a turn signal the length of a prayer. I delete them without listening twice because repetition makes grooves in your head and I am done laying track for that train. I quit the long nights last winter. I tell people it's because of my knee and because I don't bounce back from 3 a.m. the way I did at 30, which is true as far as it goes. The truer part is that I don't want to be awake when the rules don't belong to me. I take early morning shuttles. I run the Kirtland to Bloomfield hop like a school bus. I sleep like a man who has earned the right to be small in his own house. When someone asks me what the scariest thing I've seen on the road is, I don't say wrecks or a drunk weaving through 4 lanes or a tire exploding under a load that could end the day bad in 12 different outcomes. I tell them about a smile in the desert and a crowd that never blinked and a horn in the night that broke a spell. I tell them about rules that are not ours. I tell them to keep going. If you ever see her, if you ever see the car that looks like a commercial for safety and the woman who says her name is Vern and the standing people in the brush like punctuation waiting for your sentence, do this. Touch the cord for your horn like your granddad touched his hat in church. Remember that there is kindness and there is bait, and the difference between them is who set the rules. Remember an old man from Farmington told you this story like it was true because it was. Then let the desert do without you that night. Let the white sit there and reflect a sky that doesn't care. Let the watchers watch the place where you would have been. Live to put your truck in reverse in some sloppy dock at sunrise and curse a guy in a reflective vest who can't use his hands to signal left from right. Live, and send word like I'm sending word to you. Hello friends, my name is Jess Wooten. I ran nights for a third-party carrier out of Springfield for years, the sort of outfit that picks up the overflow when bigger names don't want their drivers sleeping in parking lots for an extra hour. I hauled whatever paid and didn't stink too much. Paper rolls, dog food, pallets of paint, pallets of things that weren't supposed to be paint anymore because the EPA changed the definition. If you're watching this at home, Do me the kindness of tapping subscribe and hitting the like. If you're in a cab somewhere, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. I like picturing the road between us. I want to lay down a straight line from me to you, because what I'm going to tell you messed with my sense of distance in a way no map ever warned me about. If you run nights and your dispatcher ever tries to sweeten a run by calling it quick and easy, and the address says Bracken Ridge, especially if anyone says Bledsoe, like that should mean something good to you. Take the detour your gut suggests. I wish someone had told me that. I had a 3:30 a.m. dock time on a Thursday. It was mid-December. The cold had hardened into something that made the steering wheel feel like a tool instead of a handle. The run sheet said I was to grab 8 skids of packaged adhesives from a warehouse on the east side of Bracken Ridge and take them back across the line into Kansas City by 9. Easy, if you ignore the part where the city construction had detoured freight half to Oklahoma and back. The name on the bill was Bledsoe Consolidated. I didn't think anything of it. Most plants around there have a family name stapled to the front of a word that means you'll hate their bathrooms. The notes said security will direct. Night shift. Ring bell. There was a phone number. I called at 1:50 a.m. to tell him I was running ahead of schedule, and a woman's voice answered on the second ring and said, "Loading tonight is slim. Back to door 4 when you see the green, honey." Like we already knew each other from church. Years of bad directions have taught me to be grateful when anyone sounds awake and confident. Bracken Ridge isn't a big place. It sits in the kind of bowl the wind forgets about. There's a rail spur on the north side and a scrap yard that smells like pennies when the snow melts. You can smell the paper plant before you see it. Wet wood and bleach and hot metal. The Bledsoe dock was maybe a mile past that, tucked behind a line of trees the city had planted straight like soldiers to make the industrial park look respectable. The sign at the driveway had a red arrow with deliveries stenciled in a font that told me somebody had cared in 1982. An old security shack on the left had a floodlight bolted to its roof that buzzed like a dying animal. I rolled my window and waited for the man inside to notice me. He was reading a newspaper and didn't look up until my engine note changed. The paper had the color quality of something that got left in the sun too long and then kept anyway. He wore a uniform that had once been blue, too crisply pressed for 3 in the morning, with a patch over his breast that read Bledsoe Security in red. The patch stitching was thick, like someone had hand-fed it through a machine. He stood in that way where a man's back tells you more about his years than his face. When he stepped out, I saw the face was handsomer than the uniform. Late 40s, maybe, with the kind of serious mouth you trust and the kind of eyes that belong to a man who grew up being told not to waste any. He had a thermos in his left hand. Steam rolled off it into air you could chew. "Load out," he asked. He said it like he'd been saying it to me for 30 years. 8 skids for Kansas City. "Quick turn," I said, and passed him my BOL through the window. He took it, glanced, nodded. He glanced at my plates like he was supposed to, not like he cared. Door 4 when the light's green. If it's red, you wait until it isn't. "Don't break my light, and I won't break your face," he said, with the kind of humor men use to outlaw small talk. His name tag, I noticed when he turned the clipboard back, read Sims. The red thread looked newer than the shirt. He pointed toward the building. The dock doors were all painted the same dull green you get at Army surplus. Above them a row of safety lights, red, green, marching across an alphabet of metal. Door 4 was red. Doors 2 and 3 were green. "You got a restroom?" I asked, because coffee does what coffee does. He pointed with the thermos. "Inside, by the clock. Follow the yellow line." Then he added, with a look like he was challenging me to misunderstand him, "Wash your hands after you wash your hands." No music was playing inside the truck to make a joke out of that. "You got it," I said, and eased forward. The floodlight hummed louder as the truck passed under it, and for half a second strobed. The dash lights blinked too, the way a house light dims when the refrigerator kicks on. I told myself the wiring at the gate had been spliced 100 times in winter with frozen fingers. I've spliced worse or as bad. The monitor on my dash that shows camera feeds to keep insurance adjusters on a leash fuzzed, sharpened, fuzzed again. I patted it like patting helps electronics. If you're a driver, you've lined up to a million docks. Most are the same: truck-high concrete, rubber bumpers, a metal lip that acts like a tongue. This dock had a few extras that made sense for old places. A chain you drop into to keep the trailer from drifting, an ancient set of wheel chocks shaped like they'd agree with stones, a dock plate that looked original to the building, and 40 pounds of rust. Above the roll-up door hung a sign, "Den of Operation 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. with the first line taped over with night shift, says HI in marker. Cute. Red light over the door. I set my tractor at an angle to give myself one back and straight. Breathe, breathe. Bump, bump. Lights steady, and the seal kissed the rear of the lid. You can tell by feel when you've done right. When I set the brakes, the red dock light stayed red, then flicked to green, then to red again, then back to green in a rhythm that wasn't random so much as undecided. I waited. It settled on green. From inside the building came the sound of a dock lock pin slamming, then the slap of a hand on the trailer. Someone hollered, "Bring it, Han," in a voice that sounded cheerful and tired at the same time. The interior hallway off the dock had that old warehouse smell a certain generation will recognize. Cigarette smoke sunk into paint, cleaning chemicals, soap that's been diluted with water too long, the after scent of 1,000 pairs of work boots and their owners. A yellow line snaked down the middle toward a time clock, and I followed it like a trail. The time clock was a clunky beige punch machine with a stack of cards beside it banded with a rubber that had fused to the top. Above it was a calendar tacked to cork. December. The picture at the top was a snow-dusted barn. The date squares weren't blank. Someone had circled the 15th in red. It said shift potluck and then, lighter, almost erased, cake for Lenora. The calendar wasn't new. The paper had gone the color of old teeth. What struck me, even then, in the lazy part of my brain that notices and stows details for later, is none of the dates were slashed. No excess. Some old hands slashed days like a prisoner counting time. This was a month with just the 15th circled and nothing else written to make a person felt tallied. I pushed the restroom door with my fingertips. Tile the color of Band-Aids. A baby blue mop bucket by the sink that once had wheels and now had 3 wheels and 1 wart. A mirror too small for its job. Over the sink, a laminated sign with clip art soap bubbles that said hand wash policy, REV, 1986. Below it, in pen, a second sentence had been added, and someone had traced it 3 times as if to make it official. Then wash a second time. The faucet only gave hot water, the kind of too hot that stings your skin before it warms it. I washed. I washed again. The soap smelled like something that had once been citrus and then learned fear. I dried my hands on towels that felt like they'd been ironed. When I opened the door, a woman in coveralls the color of new sky said, "Took you long enough, sugar," in a tone that a man reads as friendly if he wants to. She might have been 40, or she might have been a year older than me and better at stubbornness. Hair in a scarf in a way that told me she didn't smoke and didn't have time for me to find out. Her coveralls had a patch over the left breast that read Lenora. The letters had bled into the fabric as if they'd been fed wrong ink. She looked me up and down like she was measuring me for a task, and then smiled. And the smile hit me like knowing you've miscounted ratchet straps, and there's no one to blame but you. The smile had the shape of something that had been repeated too often. "You must be Wooten," she said. "You're early, and we like early. Did you check in with Sims?" "Yeah. He told me to wash my hands after I wash my hands," I said, trying to match the energy. I thought he was kidding. She made a face that said men think lots of things are a joke that aren't. "He's not funny," she said. "He just uses humor to fit in with the living." She blinked, like her mouth had outpaced her editor. "I mean the day's shift," she added too quickly. "They tell jokes worse than he does." I didn't get the chance to ask what she meant. A forklift beeped from somewhere deeper in the building with the metronome of a heart monitor. A bell rang, the sort used to call men to lunch in plants that have a union or had one once. It rang twice. Lenora flinched lightly when it rang, then corrected her posture. "We'll get you in and out. 8 skids adhesives, bottom half of aisle H dry. We're scanning and banding. You back in 4? "Door 4, I said. "Green light." "Good," she said. "Green means go." Another forklift beeped, this one closer. The sound bounced off the concrete in a way that made it seem to come from everywhere. "Slim will run you," she said, and stuck 2 fingers in her mouth and whistled. When the whistle died, the air felt like it kept hearing it. She looked at the clock. A big wall clock above the seal table had a second hand that twitched in quarter jumps and then jerked to the next number. The minute hand sat on the 3, the hour hand on the 3. She looked at it, and, unthinkingly, said, 33, like people say bless you. Then she laughed, shook her head, and murmured, habit. Slim showed up, driving a forklift, one knee higher than the other, where mechanics with a certain bad job end up with odd swings to their hips. He had a mustache that could have belonged to a cop in a cautionary video, and a scar under one eye the shape of Missouri. Slim looked like every foreman you've ever met who knows exactly how much he can ask from people and exactly how much he can get them to give without asking. He swung the forks into a square, settled, then hopped down with the easy step of someone who'd made 1,000 little departures and come back each time. "You're a ghost," he said to me, and then clapped my shoulder before I could react. He corrected with a grin. "From the job board. You're in and out, not a lingerer. We like that. I'm Slim Bledsoe. That means nothing but that I've got the keys and nobody else wants them because they burn. Welcome to the night. Try not to breathe." He winked at his own gallows humor. His name meant something. Bledsoe on the bill. So the forehead twitch I felt made me volunteer a smile I didn't mean. The forklift beeped again, just one lonely beep like a bird complaining. "I hear we've got adhesives," he said to Lenora. 8, she said. "H, lower. We'll scan and label. We've got 3 for the rail later if the cut-of don't get cut." "Tell me when the green rings," he said. "The light, Slim," Lenora said, patient. "The light is green." I followed them inside the warehouse proper, into that air that tastes like a battery touched to your tongue. I've been in plants where your nostrils close up like an insult. This wasn't like that. This was clean, but clean the way a layout coffin can be clean, gleaming surface that promises forgetfulness. The aisles were stenciled H, I, J on the concrete in a municipal font. The pallets were wrapped with that cheap plastic that sings when you pull it. A paper placard by aisle H had a clip that had been replaced with tape, and then the tape was replaced with a nail. The placard said, "Trench adhesive 4X fast bond 55G pail, QTY 42, MSDS on file." The MSDS sat in a red binder with pages that had been photocopied into oblivion and re-photocopied back out. A ghost of a black rectangle where a spill protocol lived. The number at the top read REV, December 1987. The date hit the same shelf in my head as the circled calendar and the word habit, and the way the clock hand had said 33. We made a neat job of it at first because I am decent at being told what to do and Slim was good at telling. He pointed. I hooked. Lenora scanned. A man I hadn't been introduced to draped corner boards like he was dressing a baby. He had a patch that read Daryl and a wedding band that looked older than he did. When I thanked him for the boards, he said, "Get it right, get it out," in a tone that sounded like a prayer said 3 times a day for 10 years. He didn't look at me directly. He looked a little past me each time, like the advice was aimed over my shoulder. We banded, and the banders sang. I've used those battery-strapped one-hand banders, and I've used the old buckle and crank kind. This one was the latter, and it made a song you don't hear much now. A high whine and a furious clack as metal teeth bit metal. Lenora kept glancing up at the clock on the wall, and then immediately doing something with her hands, checking the strap, smoothing a label, counting down the corners of a pallet with her palm, like she had a superstition about not letting her eyes sit still on 33 too long. I looked when she didn't. The clock said 3:33. When the second hand twitched its 3 little steps and went to the next number, the minute hand did not. It never did. I only felt the wrongness full on when I noticed the radio. It wasn't playing music. Plant radios never do. It played instruction, the chatter of men on the other side of the big building that I never saw because the lights down there were off. "Hose off," a voice said. "Hose off." Then a second voice, the exact same voice, a half beat later. "Hose off." The echo didn't come from a wall. It came from the radio itself. I looked at Slim, because you look at the man in charge when you can't decide whether to ask if anyone else hears it, and he was frowning at a clipboard. The clipboard had the kind of carbonless 3-part form that record sticks to and moves with. The top copy said December 15th, 1987 in a hand that had done it so often it didn't feel like writing anymore. Just a length of line that happened to make numbers. The middle copy said the same. The bottom copy had the impression so hard you could feel it with your finger. "Bledsoe," someone yelled from farther down. It wasn't the radio. It was a real voice. "Rail says back flush and drop the air. We're not going to make the cut if you don't sign." "Rail can cut me a new throat," Slim said without heat. He handed me the clipboard. made me initial the pickup line on a signature block that read Wooten, print, because that is what a man does when a foreman says do. I printed. The paper felt older than it looked, like it had been written on too many times. We got through 4 pallets before the air changed with a smell that your brain doesn't put on the right shelf at first because it doesn't want to. Like pool chlorine and new sneakers and pennies left in your mouth. And once you think that, you taste it. And once you taste it, it sits there. Sims appeared in the doorway to the dock, like he'd been standing outside the whole time, and finally decided to step into our weather. Green is red, he said to Slim, and pointed at the dock light, which was, for anyone who cared to live in a world where things don't slip, green. Rail says it's red. We'll hold 1 car past, and throw the lever when Lenora says, and then we'll be right with the day's shift. You say that like we have the day to get to, Slim said, but he said it kindly. To me, he added, they put rail in at the bottom of the slope because water goes downhill. There's a lot of go under this building. Don't let it worry you. You won't be here when it matters. When what matters? I asked. He tipped his chin toward the clock. Back to work, he said in the tone men use when they triage stupid questions. You can make fun of me for how long it took. People always think they'd notice at once, that they'd say, get me out of here, after the first weird. But night logistics mess with your threshold. You accept things you wouldn't endanger yourself for at noon. You buy the idea that a woman can whistle commands to 3 men at once, and they all jump like they're dancing, because night people are better at being teams. You let the smell be chemicals, because this is America, and chemicals pay half the rent if you don't insist they poison you. It shifted for me at the clock. On pallet 5 I wiped my hands on a towel, because Bander's cut, and I'd nicked myself, and when I glanced up, Lenora had her hand on the wall clock's face, as if she could push the minute hand forward by touch. She didn't notice me noticing. She pressed the glass hard enough to leave little stars of oil from her skin. The glass looked warm where her palm met it, as if her heat could teach time how to go. Don't, Sims said softly from the doorway. His voice changed when he talked to her, softer in the part where breath meets word. Lenora, don't. She took her hand away like she'd got caught. Habit, she said again. You know me. Sims didn't reply. He looked at me. He didn't look angry. He looked like a man who had known hunger and learned which noises it makes. Do I sign out with you when we're done? I asked him, because mundanity is a raft. Or with the office? You sign with me when we're done, he said. You signed in when you pulled under the light. That's how we keep track, in case something goes wrong. He smiled at me with a mouth that knew too much about biting the inside of cheeks. We're safety culture now. What went wrong last time? I said, joking, because men do that when a thing is sharp. Air, he said, and water, and the excuse that those are the same thing in a pipe. We finished banding 6 and 7. Slim moved like he was on the good side of a pain pill. Lenora moved like she was on the other side of one. Daryl never looked up. At pallet 8, something knocked behind the wall of the dock. Not, there's a truck bumping knock. Not metal on metal. A sound like someone tapping on the side of a large ceramic jug underwater. Thunk, thunk, thunk. The frequency lived in the part of my jaw where bad dentists take advantage. I said, you getting that? Like a man asks a car, not a person. Slim stopped mid-strap and held up one finger, as if to ask the room to wait to breathe. Sims didn't move from the doorway. The radio said, hose off, and then, hose off, again, and then the bell rang twice. Too fast, like someone flicked a light switch on the bell out of impatience. 276 psi, a voice in the radio said, and this time there wasn't an echo. Just that number. I didn't know if it meant the pressure in a line or the score you need to roll at a bowling alley to impress anyone. It sounded like a magic spell in a language that pretended to be numbers. Lenora's scanner beeped twice. She shook it and hit the button again and dragged the red beam over the barcode. The number on the screen flickered and then showed exactly what you wanted to show in warehouses, a match. You'll be after 3, she told me. You don't have to be. You can go now. We'll get your paper later. I need the paper, I said, because you don't get paid without the paper. Dispatch will make a new kind of enemy if I roll without that. You'll get paper, she said. You'll get exactly the paper you need. She peeled the top sheet off a stack on the work table and handed it to me. It was a BOL. The date read December 15th, 1987. My name was written on the line for driver in a careful hand that looked like it had learned Palmer method in school. There you are. I wasn't driving in 1987, I said. I know, she said. But we were. You can laugh at a man for not leaving immediately after a sentence like that. It wasn't the words that kept me. It was the smell. The chlorine penny sneakers became pine. That too familiar fake clean of a janitor closet, and then bleached back toward nothing. And that sort of oscillation makes the thinking part of you stoggier than the animal part. I wanted out, but I wanted the way out that looked proper. The green dock light clicked red, clicked green, clicked red. The forklift beeped in a rhythm that didn't match the beeping it had made minutes earlier, like somebody had reprogrammed its warning for a tempo their own heart preferred. You said wash your hands after I wash my hands. I said to Sims, more to hear myself say a sentence than to get an answer. He nodded. And then you don't touch your face, he said. If you'd like a third instruction, it's this. Do not linger at 3:33. It's always 3:33 in here, I said. He gave a sad little tilt to his head. There, he said. You're listening. He stepped aside so I could see straight down the warehouse. The lights were off 100 feet out. The way cheap fluorescents go to sleep, they never wake from. In the dark of that far aisle, I could see a suggestion of motion, and I will be honest with you. The motion was exactly like the pattern of workers moving boxes between conveyor belts, except their hands didn't seem to set anything down. The arms made the motions of lifting and turning and placing, and the space didn't acknowledge receipt. They worked a pattern, and the pattern worked them, like the ghost left by a ceiling fan after it has stopped. What happened on the 15th? I asked, because I had to call the question by its birthday. And why do I know that date without anyone telling me? Because you can read, Slim said. And because the building is polite enough to keep its anniversaries. He set the bander down. He put his hand on the top of Paladade and felt the wrap the way a man checks a child's forehead for fever. We had a spill, he said. He didn't look at me when he said it. He didn't look at anyone. His eyes were on the middle distance where true things sit when they don't want to start fights. The rail switched in a tank at the wrong time, and the wrong tote went to the wrong place, and the phone that should have meant safe became meaning of another kind. It wasn't a fire you could put out. It was air you could breathe, and then you couldn't. We had alarms for some kinds of accidents. This was the other kind. If the rail had been right, we would have had a world that involves funerals. We had a world that involved paperwork instead. He looked at the BOL in my hand. We've been doing paperwork a long time. Everyone. I asked, and meant, did you die? Not everyone, he said. Nobody important enough to show up on the TV for more than a day. You know how that works. The company's lawyer cried and said all the right words about community and sorrow and redoubled commitments. The inspector signed the paper he needed to sign. Half the city got new pipes. The other half got used to a smell. Do you remember the first time you saw a man with a respirator get a cigarette out from under it because he couldn't quit? The radio said, hose off, one more time. But the echo didn't follow. I heard water in walls that shouldn't have had water. A far rail horn blew once, and then nothing followed. Sound got mean. Why am I here then? I said, and I meant, why do you keep working? You're here because they wrote down that you would be, Lenora said, and she must have read something on my face because she added, softer, and because it's easier to keep a pattern going than it is to end it once it has got into the floor. She gestured at the yellow line on the concrete. If you keep painting the line, people walk it. If you stop painting the line, they still walk it. If you build a new building on old pipe, the old pipe gets confused and asks the new building to remember the old orders. That's what my daddy said. He was a pipe fitter and died in a recliner. Sometimes there's still fairness. Sims turned the page on his newspaper. The headline visible at the top of the page said Cardinals trade, and the rest was obscured by his thumb. The font belonged to a decade whose swears and jokes I know by heart. He took a sip from his thermos and said, coffee's hot, like a place setting in a world where men respect that sort of thing. He tapped the clock with his knuckle. You go now, he said. You ain't finished, Slim said, but he said it without any attempt to mean it. I'll put the last one on, I told him, because you can make a lot of mistakes in a life, and the only way to sleep is to be the man who completes the simple thing handed to him. I grabbed the strap, pulled it across, slipped the buckle, yanked. Metal sang. The band cut my glove. I looked at the slice and then at my hand and found that my skin had agreed to be intact. I felt off balance like a poorly loaded trailer. Lenora slapped the completed BOL on top of the stack. The top page had my name on it again, in the same careful hand as before. I looked to see if she had written it. She hadn't. Her sharpest sat and used beside her stapler. The name was a twin to the previous one. "We love a complete set," she said quietly. "We love a match." "Do I bring back the signed copy?" I asked like a fool. "You will," she said. "You already did." She handed me the carbon copy, brown right where the ink should be blue. "Go." He means it. 3:33 is when it takes you if it's going to. We're all better off if you only drive through. Sims stepped aside again so I could see the dock. The green docking light made a shape on the floor that was more green than light. He said, "Thank you for washing your hands." His mouth said it like the sentence had been taught to him by a laminated sign, and his eyes said it like he used to stand at a sink asking for a different kind of help. I backed away from the table with the BOL. Slim nodded like a man tipping his hat to a funeral procession. Daryl told the radio, "Hose off," and for once the radio agreed. I hit the push bar on the door, and the hallway to the dock pinched, as if whoever had drawn the building hadn't finished the lines. When I stood beside my trailer and looked down at the feet of the dock leveler, the water that lives under all buildings in the Midwest glimmered, not a puddle, but an idea of moisture. The dock lock thunked open. The red light flicked green, red, green, and held. I climbed into the cab and felt my body remind me how to be me. When the pin released, there was a sound like comfort. A clunk that felt like an old man clearing his throat for church. I pulled forward and watched the dock line in the mirror shrink. Sims stood in the door of the shack looking at my taillights like he was counting them and wanted to count higher than the number we had. I could see, in that particular sodium light that turns all dark hair into the color of pennies, that his uniform had a thin line on the sleeve where a patch had once been and had been unpicked. I waved. He didn't wave back. He lifted the thermos a half-inch, and that would have to be enough tribute for both of us. I hit the road, and the first song that came on the radio was from 1987. I don't believe in messages, but I do believe in what the night is willing to give you when you haven't earned it. I changed the station to a preacher who was yelling about something else entirely, and then changed it to static because I wanted a noise that promised no meaning. The highway was a sheet of black glass, and my lights were a small animal's eyes running ahead. I drove. I didn't look at the clock. I knew what the clock would say. The truck hummed the way only old trucks do when they remember a job they were made for. I breathed like I had maybe been holding my breath inside a thing that wanted me to take its air instead. At the truck stop outside Nevada, I pulled in for coffee, and to make my hands stop doing the small shake they had decided to do without consulting me. Inside, at the counter with the bad muffins, a TV on mute was playing an old video of some industrial accident that had been turned into a PSA about emergency exits. The captioning lagged behind and then caught up. A younger guy with a face the shape of kindness asked if I wanted cream, which I usually do not, and that night I wanted very much. When he handed it to me, his knuckles brushed mine and were very warm. It is a small thing to love other people for having warm hands. It is not insignificant. I called dispatch from the lot with a voice that said, "Just checking in," which is how we ask for help without having to owe somebody. The night guy, Junior, picked up. "You're early," he said. "Be careful. Receiver's cranky when you're early and cranky when you're late." "I've got the paper," I said. 8 skids adhesives. Bledsoe Consolidated. He whistled into his cigarette in a way the phone didn't like. "Man, they still open?" "That's funny," I said, "because they seem very open." He made a sound like he was going to say more and then didn't. I got back on the road with coffee that was too hot and not good enough and perfect anyway. At the receiver in Kansas City, the dock man scanned my paperwork and looked annoyed in the general way dock men look when night goes weird. "This date's wrong," he said, tapping the 1987 with his pen. I handed him the second page. It had the correct date. The font was slightly different on the second page than the first, as if it had been printed from a printer that had learned its letters last week. He looked at my name. "Wooten," he said, in the tone of a man testing if it tastes right. He signed. He slapped a sticker. He said, "My brother-in-law used to run nights for a place in Bracken Ridge. They closed that warehouse after a spill. You deliver somewhere else, probably. They reuse names." He handed me my copy back. It said Bledsoe Consolidated and revved the same quiet engine inside my brain. I went home after that route like work gets me to do twice a week, shaking hands as little as possible, stepping over the boundary into my own heat with the feeling that my house had been expecting me. I put the BOL copy on the table for the pile where I keep 3 months of paper in case anyone decides they want to argue with me. And when I came back with a sandwich, it was filed under a magnet on my fridge instead, like someone had assumed the person who lives here is tidy. I hadn't put it there. My wife hadn't. The magnet was an old one my daughter had made in the shape of a turkey hand when she was 5. I moved the paper back to the table. It made the exact sound paper makes when you move it, and nothing else did. This detail feels cheap to include, and I'm including it because it happened, and it made me mad in the way being scared will make a man. Sleep came with the stupid force that hits you after you've been good too long. My mind went directly to a hallway with a yellow line painted down the middle. At the end of it, a clock. I couldn't see the numbers, but I knew what it said. To the left of the hallway were doors full of wind. To the right, a woman in coveralls looked up only when the bell rang, and when it did, she put her hand on the clock and then pulled her hand away like she'd been caught. Sim stood in the doorway reading a sports section, and I could smell thermos coffee the way you smell childhood when you open a box your mother should have thrown away. When I woke, the room smelled faintly of pine cleaner, and my sink in the bathroom burbled once, as if it were laughing into a wet towel. You live with a thing like that by trying to declare it boring. I declared the whole experience boring. The brain is not an idiot. It knows when it is being lied to by the mouth it is attached to. I found myself reading about Bracken Ridge in those hours no righteous person uses for research. On the local paper's website, you can search by year. I pulled up 1987 and got a list of stories that remind a man what America was talking about then. An NFL strike that made my uncle weird for months, a snow that wasn't as bad as people said, ribbon cuttings for places that aren't there anymore. On December 16th, 1987, there's a story with a headline that reads something like, "Minor chemical release ends without injury." There's a black and white photo of men in suits and hats you don't see anymore standing at a fence at night, pretending to understand a diagram another man in a hat is pointing at with a wooden stick. The story says the railroad took full responsibility and that the company on whose property the release occurred would be conducting remedial ventilation and providing reassurances to the community. The name Bledsoe appears once, and then you can watch it in your mind wipe itself off the page like a wet finger. The word foam appears twice. A woman's name appears once, Lenora, and then not again in any paper that year as far as the website is concerned. I went to the county office in daylight like a person should and asked an old man whose job is to keep the ledgers if I could see inspection reports from that period. He did what old men do when another old man asks for something specific. He measured me first. Then he went in the back and brought out a copy with a staple that had been removed and put back wrong. It had a one-page note stapled on top that said reinspection after Christmas and looked like it had been typed by a machine that hated letters. The inspector's signature was a loop and a slash. I recognized the slash because it matched the one on my BOL, and I will die with that knowledge rattling around in me like a toothpick in a jar. A week later, the company put me back on the lane. Other drivers had kids' programs, court dates, the flu. You'd be within reason to ask why I didn't say no. I told myself I owed that place something, even if it was just the courtesy of not acting like a child around it. If you pretend long enough to be brave, your bones will let you walk through the door. I told dispatch I'd do it if they made it early. He made the kind of sound that means he'll try and then doesn't. The time on the run sheet was 3:30 a.m. I called ahead. The same woman's voice as before said, "Door 4, when you see the green, honey." It felt like speed limits. It was colder that night, fine ice falling, the kind that makes a halo around lights and makes the world sound like it's trying not to move. Sims took my BOL and didn't look at it. He looked at me and said, "You came back," in the tone of men greeting their sons after deployments. I said I wanted to be respectful. He said respect belongs to the living. He said it kindly. The floodlight hummed and did not strobe. The camera screen on my dash went clean and stayed clean and then filled with a faint white shimmer like an old TV. I backed into door 4. Green clicked red, clicked green, held. The dock lock engaged with a kindness you don't often get. Inside, nothing had changed and everything had. Lenora looked like she had slept a week or had a week taken from her. Slim was thinner in the way men get around the eyes. Daryl still didn't look up. The clock said 3:33 when I looked, because it is greedy for attention, and that is what greed does. The smell was closer to nothing than before, like when you wash a paper cut and it burns because you've reminded your body it's open to the world. We loaded again, and the radio talked to itself in the language of men who think they control air. "Hose off," it said, and sometimes it didn't, but you knew it wanted to. The bell rang twice. I signed a paper that felt like mine and not mine. I washed my hands and washed them again. When it was done, Lenora did the thing that turned me from scared to something else. She took a cake out from under the seal table, a sheet cake in one of those aluminum trays with a cardboard lid. It had frosting that might once have been white. On it, in blue, a name, Lenora. The date below it, December 15th. She picked up the little plastic knife that comes with those cakes and didn't cut it. She looked at me and said, "You ever wish people remembered something about you besides a day?" "Yes," I said, because I wasn't a liar in that moment. "All the time. I like to dance," she said suddenly, and the way she said it punched a hole in me. We went on Thursdays after shift. We'd smell like work and try not to. We told ourselves we were making it out of here. We told ourselves a lot of things. Now I tell strangers to go before the number. "You can come with me," I said, and the idea felt stupid and wholly on my tongue. "Come as far as the gate, and then keep going. I'll hold the door." "I can get to the gate any time I want," she said. "I can get everywhere to the exact edge of here. That's the problem. The pipes under this building know more about us than we do. We picked a bad spot to stay." She set the cake down. "Go now, Jess." Sims walked me out. We stood under the floodlight that hummed. Out there, the snow made little halos around our mouths. "You got a family?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Girl in college. Boy who thinks he's smarter than I am and usually is. Wife who can change a tire faster than me because she's meaner." "Good," he said. "Write their names down. Put the paper where someone can find it. Don't be a man who leaves stadium receipts and nothing else." He held out his hand. I took it. His fingers were cooler than they should have been, not cold like a cliche, just a degree wrong. "If somebody ever asks you why you didn't stay to finish the last pallet," he said, "you tell them Sims told you to go. Tell them Sims said the air owes them nothing." I drove without the radio. You can hear the heater fan better that way. You can hear the sound the tires make. It's nice to hear something uncomplicated once in a while. The BOL copy on my passenger seat slid a half-inch and stopped, as if an invisible hand had caught it and laid it down. When I got to the receiver, the man who had called me Wooten again and thanked me in the voice people reserve for sidewalks shoveled before anyone had to ask. "These go to line 3, he said, "and remind me to ask my boss why we get so much of this from out there when they could stock it closer." "I'll let you," I said, and he nodded like he doesn't get to decide anything either. I quit nights the next spring, after a winter of pretending I was still built for them, and after a dream where I stood in my own kitchen washing my hands and a voice from under the sink said, "Wash them again." I went to days because an old man I respect told me the only thing you accomplish at 3:33 is borrowing a debt from your lungs. I still run loads. Still make bad coffee good with enough cream. Still back into docks where men who hate their lives try not to act like they do. But when someone says Bracken Ridge, I say the truck has a sensor issue and won't idle right if the temperature drops. If anyone presses, I say I've got a daughter in school and I'd like to keep her there. I keep a folder of papers for my taxes. That makes me like every other man who's worked for too few safety briefings and too many hungover dispatchers. In that folder there's a page that shouldn't be there. The first BOL from that night with the 1987 date and the careful hand. Every so often, when I'm looking for a receipt to prove to the government that they owe me for straps and fluids, my hand will land on that paper, and I'll feel the thickness that old paper has, the softness. I'll put it back. I don't throw it out. It feels like throwing out a flag. Once a month I go to the county library like I'm checking on a sick friend. I sit at the old microfilm reader because they still keep it serviced thanks to a grant that makes the old librarian happy. I scroll with my fingers on the crank and watch little bits of my county's life swim past in grayscale. I always end up back at the week of December 15th, 1987. There's a photo on the 18th of a man named Len Bledsoe smiling with a pair of scissors in his hand at a ribbon cutting for a winter clothes drive. He looks kind in a way that warns me. The caption spells Lenora's name wrong, Leonora B., and lists her as employee representative. She has a paper hat on, like a nurse in a play, which tells me what men thought of women even when they needed them to keep the building in one piece. I take out my phone and take a picture of the microfilm because the librarian says that's allowed. Then I put the phone away and sit for a minute like I'm praying. Except I don't believe in anything except what keeps my kids safe. It's a very specific faith, and it mostly fails. I have told this to 3 people in person and to you now. One person said, "That's just a story," with the voice of a guy who wants to drive and be uncomplicated and is mad at the world for giving him a second layer. One put their hand over mine while I talked, and I suspect I will marry them again if they'll have me. One said, "I had a place like that off Route 24 where the freezer doors breathe, and the night manager knew my name the first time I went." And then we both fell silent like men who've admitted a sin and don't want absolution, just company. If you ever get a load sheet with that address and that time and somebody says, "It's quick, in and out, Slim will run you," you tell them Jess said no. If you're the kind of person that hears no as a dare, then promise me this. Wash your hands, and then wash them again. Because sometimes the only difference between leaving whole and leaving with something borrowed from you is what you carry on your skin. Don't linger at 333. Don't be hurt by the fact that the air does not love you back. If a woman named Lenora hands you a sheet cake and tells you she liked to dance, don't try to rescue her. She won't thank you, and it won't work. Think your best thought about her, and put it down wherever the part of you that keeps notes lives. If a security guard says his name is Sims and reminds you that respect belongs to the living, shake his hand. Remember the cool of it. Remember how a man can stand like a door you wish you could hold for someone else. Drive away while you still know your own name. And if paperwork shows up later with a date that doesn't belong to your life, file it under the things I got paid for that I'll never understand, which is to say, under everything true. When the pipes in your kitchen laugh, run the water and let it be loud so you can pretend you didn't hear. When you pray, if you do, add a sentence for men and women who have to remind time how to move. Ask that it move for them just once, the way it moves for us when we aren't paying attention. Ask nothing for yourself except the grace to keep driving past the places that ask you to be their new rule.